The roll call for the special city council meeting of April 6th, 7:30 p.m. Councillor Wallace.
Present.
Councillor Zeid.
Here.
Councillor Devlin.
Here.
Councillor Khan.
Present.
Councillor Lane.
Here.
Councillor McCauley.
Here.
Councillor Connell.
Present.
Councillor Shan.
Present.
Councillor Tantar.
Here.
Councillor Vogel.
Present.
Council President Argument.
Here.
We have a full house, Mr. President.
Okay, now we're going to go to public comment. This has proven to be awkward because we don't have a sign-in list. We're not there in person. What I'd like to do is, rather than hold to our rule, because as chair I can recognize people, unless there's an objection from the councilors, I want to give any member of the public who raises his or her hand electronically 2 minutes, state their name, their address, and then I've got a timer that I borrowed from my third grade daughter, and we'll go from there. Does anyone have any objection to that procedure? I'm not hearing any. Okay, with that, the first person raising his hand is Amr Ibrahim.
Good evening, councilors.
Amr.
This is Amr Ibrahim. I live on 85 Prospect Street in Newburyport here, and as a medical doctor, I just wanted to wholeheartedly support your efforts here tonight. I know one of the agenda items was talking about an ordinance about enforcing the social distancing, and I can't stress how important this is. You know, over the past week, I've worked in both Anna Jakes at Holy Family Haverhill and also set foot in Holy Family Methuen to do some procedures, and I am seeing this, you know, pandemic unfold in our ICUs. Lawrence General Hospital right now has 4 more ICU patients admitted than they have ICU beds, so they're technically full, using some overflow. All our local hospitals have ramped up their capabilities to take the surge of patients, and I really say that this needs to be taken seriously. I'm glad it's being taken seriously by you folks, and wholeheartedly support whatever efforts we can do to try to encourage people and, if need be, enforce people to follow the social distancing policy so that we can make it through this pandemic and, you know, be able to eventually move on. I thank you all for your efforts.
Thank you. Lucas Phipps.
Lucas Phipps here, 2 Allen Street, Newburyport. I too am here to echo my support for the ordinances to enforce the procedures we have with the social distancing. I'd say this as a person that's younger and has been playing by the rules that not only do we need to be mindful about not preventing ourselves from getting infected, but also from preventing perhaps transmission of said viruses. And today we were lucky to have a very beautiful day. I'd argue it was maybe less lucky, given I feel like the rainy days we've had in the past have kept people inside. And what we need to do now in order to flatten this curve is treat these things like rainy days and treat these things seriously. So I believe it is 100% necessary to have stricter enforcement on the existing rules, as I believe it's going to save us from stricter rules later on, and stricter rules that can come with filled hospitals and unfortunately body counts at points. So I'm strongly in support of any measure to increase the current measures we have present, and I back my full support.
Thank you. Before we go to written comment, we did get a written comment. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? If you're not able to figure out the, oh, here we go, hold on. Steve Hines. Steve?
He's still muted.
Yeah, Steve, you're muted on your end. You're not muted on our end, but you're muted on your end. Steve?
Bottom left, Steve. Take your mouse down all the way to the bottom.
Hold on.
There you
Steve?
go.
There we go. I think we can hear you now, Steve.
Nope.
Not hearing anything. I'm sorry. Tell you what, if you can, clerk, are you at your email?
I am.
Okay, maybe Steve, you could try emailing him, and then we'll circle back to you because we have to read something else into the record. So I want to make sure you get a turn. I'm sorry, but I don't know what else to do. So let's clerk, if you could please read in the written comment we got from Brian Callahan, and then we'll circle back to Steve.
Yes, we actually have two, Mr. President. We have one from Brian Callahan and one from Linda and Mike Lambert. Brian Callahan states as follows. Good afternoon, councilors. I'm writing to express my disappointment in the council for having an emergency meeting tonight to vote on implementing fines on the public who do not adhere to the governor's 6-foot groups of 10 social distancing recommendation on public ways, such as the rail trail and boardwalk, due to the pandemic. I question whether it's a true emergency and counter that it could wait until your next meeting on April 13th. Not only because most of the residents will have no idea that the meeting is occurring mere hours from now, but also that your proposal would go into effect only 15 hours after the meeting begins. There would be almost no way for the city to get the message out to the residents before noon on April 7th, presuming the ordinance passes. I also question who will be ticketing people when our small police force barely has time to simply disperse crowds as it is. Regardless of the fact that they should not be congregating, are we going to be ticketing groups of teens? Are we to really expect that the parking attendants, mainly seniors, are going to patrol the boardwalk and issue tickets? I also question the wording of this part of the ordinance. Quote, for any person to stand, sit, walk, jog, run, or otherwise be located within 6 feet of any other person with whom such person does not reside in a household. There's no way to know for sure without law enforcement requiring ID checks who lives where. In theory, the sponsors of this ordinance have the best interest of the public in mind, but fining people who have potentially been out of work for weeks is outrageous. Thank you, Brian Callahan, 29 Warren Street. I have a second letter, Mr. President, shall I?
Yes, continue.
So this is addressed to Councilor Shan. Hi, Heather. We hope you support the emergency order at the special meeting tonight. Mike and I are very much in favor. We watch out our window as people walk the rail trail all day long and distancing is not being practiced. We see large groups congregating on the waterfront, people greeting, hugging, petting dogs. Groups don't form proper lines outside the coffee roasters waiting to get in.
I'm on a city council.
Being the only place open on Waterfront, it looks like a normal Saturday morning down frequently. Better policing needs to happen. Thank you, Linda and Mike Lambert. Those are the two that I have, Mr. President.
Okay, let's try Steve Hines again. Steve, can you try talking?
Yes, I got it. I'm not normally
right.
this computer illiterate. I apologize.
No, not at all. Please, just your address and you got your 2 minutes, please.
Steve Hines, chairman of the Newburyport Waterfront Trust. I'm receiving calls at home regarding the boardwalk and the waterfront that people aren't social distancing, that their kids are riding their bikes and on skateboards, very crowded. You know, that's, it's like, why, you know, they expect me to go down there and, you know, police it myself. You know, it's a frustrating situation, but definitely it's a problem. So I just wanted to let you know that I am receiving calls regarding that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else before I close public comment? And again, if you can't work the raise your hand thing, maybe speak up. Okay, I'm seeing no further people. I'm gonna close public hearing. Okay, so at this point, before we get to the meat of the matter, which is Ordinance 56, Emergency Preamble, under Rule 6, it says, if I wish to express an opinion on any subject under debate, I shall relinquish the chair. So I'm going to be doing that. I've asked Councillor Shand if she would take the chair, and she's agreed. So I'm making her a co-host. It sounds like a game show. The three reasons are she's not a sponsor of the ordinance. I am. She's Zoom savvy, and she said she'd do it. So with that, I'll put myself on mute and relinquish the chair to Councillor Shand.
All right, so we'll see how savvy I am with this. So City Clerk Jones, we do have the emergency preamble, the ordinance in front of us. Can you state what we are reading tonight?
Yeah, Councillor Shan, I think what we're talking about is dealing with the emergency preamble and the waiver of the city council rules in one motion. And then following that, which requires a 2/3 vote, which in our situation means 8, we would then get to the ordinance itself, which needs a simple majority 6. So the emergency preamble, I don't think I need to read a page and a half of whereases. It's quite well written. The gist of it is that due to the pandemic and due to the advisory issued on March 17th by the mayor and any and all proclamation and orders, including the Department of Public Health reporting 12,500 cases of COVID-19 in the Commonwealth, and due to public properties being under the jurisdiction of the city, including without limitation, parks, playgrounds, beaches, etc., as they are regional resources. And whereas Anna Jake's Hospital is the only licensed hospital within the city of Newburyport, has a capacity of 140 beds, including 8 beds in the intensive care unit. And whereas COVID-19 is such that its spread is not mitigated significantly and immediately could overwhelm said facility. And it goes on for several other whereases. But having said that, that's the gist of the emergency that we're dealing with, Councillor Shan. And I think at this point, I might suggest that in order, a motion to approve the emergency and approve the waiver of the rules is in order.
So move.
I'll make that motion, and the rule specifically is Rule 9B as in boy, which normally requires any ordinance to have 2 readings and 2 roll call votes at separate meetings.
So I have, is the first by Councillor Eigenman. Did I hear a second by Councillor Tantar?
Yep.
All right, so can you read what the motion states?
The motion, I'm sorry, the motion made by Councillor Eigenman is just that to declare an emergency preamble for ordinance 56, excuse me, and at the same time waive city council rules any and all necessary, including specifically Rule 9B.
Okay, so we have the motion, which is brought about by Councillor Eigenman and seconded by Councillor Tantar. Is there a discussion? I saw Councillor Zeed's hand first. Councillor Zeed.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to state my disappointment as well that an ordinance covering several pages, which clearly took some effort to write, is announced, proposed, and then had a meeting on within just a matter of a few hours. I'm disappointed that the council president chose to call this meeting as an emergency meeting. I also don't think that was wise or appropriate in this case. I'm disappointed that residents basically don't have a chance to effectively participate in this discussion because they've effectively been robbed of that opportunity when a meeting with 3 different versions of a packet are sent out over the course of a matter of hours, which is very unfortunate. I'm still not exactly clear what the difference is between those different packets. And I think that this is frankly a bit of an ambush. And unfortunately, I think this motion that's on the floor is a continuation of that ambush by trying to both waive the charter off and waive our rules off in one motion, is effectively saying, yep, we're throwing it all out the window. And, you know, basically we're just going to do anything we want on a matter of just a few hours notice. And that's without going into further comment on the matter at hand itself. So I just wanted to start off by expressing that disappointment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Zeed. Councillor Tantar.
Yes, I just want to speak to the fact that this is a real emergency. If we were to wait a week, as was suggested, we would see a significant change in our experience. A week ago, in Newburyport, in Essex County, there were 72 cases per 100,000 population. Today, it's 137 cases, 1 week later. All right, it's almost doubled in 1 week. As a result of that, I don't know if it's going to happen the next week. I'm presuming that it will. And I think waiting 1 week to take this action is waiting too long. And I would ask my fellow councilors, if this is not an emergency, what is?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So in order, we're going to have Councillor Connell, Councillor Khan, and then Councillor Zeid again. Councillor Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree very strongly with the comments made by Councillor Tantar. We have through the years declared emergencies per se for a variety of different activities, none of which, in my recollection, rise to the significance of this particular emergency that we're facing. And I reflect back on some comments that were made about 10 days ago by Anthony Fauci, the individual who's leading with Dr. Birx, the scientific community's response to this particular problem. And what he said, and I paraphrase obviously, that you cannot get too far ahead of it. If it seems like too much now, in retrospect, it will look like not enough. And I believe that we should give the individuals who have a responsibility to help keep people apart the tools that they need to enforce that order of the governor, consistent with those recommendations of the federal government, in order to keep people safer if they're not taking it seriously enough. I believe that public health and safety mandate this action. I think it is, yes, it is unusual, but these are very unusual times.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Connell. So just so everyone appreciates, it's Councillor Khan, Councillor Zeid, Councillor Vogel, and then Councillor Devlin next. So Councillor Khan.
Just a sec, Mr. President, I'm not able to raise my hand. Sorry, it doesn't give me that option. If you could put me in the queue, that would be great.
All right, so you will be after Councillor Devlin.
Could I have a point of order? For the chair, could I have a point of order? It was my understanding by our rules that everyone would speak first before another council would get to speak for a second time. I think that's in our rules. So can we observe that?
All right, thank you.
It is indeed.
All right, so Councillor Khan.
Yes, thank you, Interim Council President. I am just speaking to the merits of the emergency preamble, and I do support us approving the emergency preamble, largely in looking at the reasons that we would do a special meeting, an emergency meeting such as this. One of the reasons would be public safety. I do think that's within our realm with this situation. We all agree this is a very unique, unprecedented situation, and it does warrant, I guess, procedures that have typically not had to be explored or done. So I do support moving forward with the emergency preamble. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. All right, Councillor Vogel.
If I could interrupt here, Councillor Shan, the police marshal has asked that he be unmuted. He said he can't control it from his iPad.
Okay, let's see if I can control that. He is allowed to talk. Was there anyone else? Marshall Murray, are you able to talk?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so back to the list. We have Councillor Vogel next.
Thank you, Madam President. Whereas I do see the logic in the arguments from the Ward 1 councillor and the concern about the public getting notice of this and so on and so forth, I think that we're not necessarily throwing everything aside and doing as we wish. We are considering seriously the public in this. And if we have to have this discussion and it takes a while for the body of the people we represent to catch up, so be it. I'm fully in support of having the discussion. Just so on the emergency preamble alone, I'm fully in support of it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Vogel. Councillor Devlin.
So I rise in opposition to this emergency preamble. I personally have not had the proper amount of time to review this and prepare to participate in this important debate. This touches on numerous fundamental constitutional rights, and I don't like being given, I read this at 12:05, so I basically had less than 7.5 hours, while I also have a job, a day job, that you know is in various states of shambles around me because I represent hospitality industry professional businesses, but I still have work to do, and I haven't had time to prepare for this important. Forget about the public, because I'm going to touch on that next. But we're doing exactly, you know. But let me say, I haven't had time to prepare, especially when I've gotten 3 different versions of this over this period. So that's number one. I personally have not had enough time to prepare for the debate that we would have after this, which I cannot tell you, folks, it has absolutely civil liberties, you know, our fundamental civil liberties are going to be affected by this. And I'm not prepared to argue that yet. On a second note, and more importantly is, and it's been my theme since we, on an electronic vote, on an electronic meeting, we voted to allow ourselves to do electronic meetings. So there's a dubious basis for us even to make any decisions through this forum. But putting that aside, since we talked about this 3 weeks ago, nothing has changed. Yes, more cases have you know, incurred all over, but we don't need to give. We don't have to wait until next Monday's meeting. Nobody is against an emergency meeting. We could have an emergency meeting. We could have, if the city council president had acted on some suggestions, we could have had a meeting 48 hours from now on Wednesday and given the proper posting, which is done to allow the public to have time to have input. I'd like to ask how certain people who did comment, a public comment, heard about this, but you know, some of them are self-evident. But other people, like Brian Callahan, for instance, said, I've got a school committee meeting. You guys are doing this again on the night that we have a school committee meeting, and I can't participate in this, and I can't listen to my counselors discuss this. He's not the only one. I've been getting calls and texts like that. We are not giving people enough time, and we could have given them 48 hours. And I'm sorry, it's a mark of self-importance to think that you're going to curb this COVID-19 pandemic by saving 48 hours. And I've got to be honest with you, when I talked to people earlier today, some city councilors, I was really upset, and I've calmed down somewhat, but this is offensive to me from our process and from the civil liberties. We're not giving that due justice, and we're not giving all of us a chance to prepare for a very important debate. So, you know, look, I'm not going to go as far, you know, I understand that everybody has good intentions who have proposed this, but I don't think it's that much of an ask to get a 48-hour notice. It's probably too late to now. Maybe we could continue it from today to Wednesday and vote on that, and give people a chance to have some input, not just people who know that this meeting is happening. Give members of the public a chance to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Devlin. Councillor Eigenman.
Yes. So Rule 2A says that special meetings of the council are held at the call of the president, or actually any 6 members. But you have to give the notice normally 48 hours in advance. There is an exception. Quote, "This notice shall, except in an emergency of which the president shall be the sole judge, be delivered at least 48 hours in advance." And then you have to set what the purpose of the meeting is. So I guess I don't think mark of self-importance was given as a compliment, but I am the president, and it does say that it's in my sole judge.
Councillor Devlin, thank you. Councillor Eigenman, please continue.
Yes, again, the president has to be the sole judge, and I'll take the criticism for it, and that's fine. But I had to make a decision whether it was an emergency, of which I am the sole judge. And I decided it was. I did consider waiting for 48 hours, even before I called the meeting, not just when I was asked by certain councilors. Because, of course, that would be the safer course. But other things that I considered and why I do think it's an emergency, first, I don't need to repeat what other councilors have said, like Councilor Tantar. You know, I do think it is a health emergency. Others may differ, but I had to make that call. You know, I also did look at the constitutional issues and weighed them, and we can get into the merits on that later. But this is an enforcement of existing proclamations by our governor. And please note that the governor in the executive branch, there is more process going on here than ever went on with the governor. The governor can issue a proclamation at any time, and he can make his proclamations go into effect immediately. Not 7 hours from now, not 12 hours from now, immediately, without any notice to anybody, without any due process. So I don't think it's fair to say that what we're doing is out of order. In addition, our health director could do that. Our health director could issue the same order, and our health board could issue that same order. It just so happens we're the local legislature, and we retain the power over health, safety, and public welfare. And so I decided that it was appropriate as president because I found that it was an emergency. Now, there's a fail-safe. Just because I'm the sole judge under Rule 2A, if 2/3 of this council does not agree, then it's the emergency preamble won't pass, and the waiver of the rule won't pass. And that's our system. That's how it works. Motions to postpone are also in order too, if someone wants to do that. That's all I wanted to say, and I'll leave the merits of the item later.
All right, thank you, Councillor Eigenman. There is one councillor who is yet to speak, who has raised their hand. That's Councillor Lane.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, great, thanks. I respect everything that's being said here, and this is cowboy country. This is something that we're not used to and we've never dealt with. So we're all trying to get through it. To speak to the emergency portion of this, I'm glad we're all on this call right now having this conversation and doing our residents justice by keeping them safe, or at least having a conversation about how to do that better. I think we need to do that. I've seen it myself. People tailgating around town, just for the past 2 days, I've seen it nonstop. So at this point, it's, we need to give exactly, as Councilor Canal said, give them the tools to enforce this. And I'm certainly open to having an open dialect about the language within. I think there's common ground there. I think, I respect everybody that's on this council enough to know that I value their opinions and their various opinions, various takes on what's going on. So that's why the emergency portion of it, I don't think we have enough time to wait. You might, others might think that we've got, a week, 2 weeks. Some people have no clue. As somebody who's talking to first responders, emergency personnel, nurses, doctors, I know what they're seeing. I know in short order, our hospital could be inundated. And the other portion of this is the secondary fallout of this, secondary casualties. So when our hospital's all filled 2 days from now, what happens then? So I just ask that we have the conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. So there is one more counselor, Councillor Wallace, who has not spoken, and there are 4 other counselors who have their hands up. I am going to recognize the Department of Frank Jackalone, who has his hand up after Councillor Wallace speaks, before the other counselors have their second go at this. So Councillor Wallace.
Thank you. Normally, I would prefer to have more process, 48 hours or until the next meeting. I'm big on process and allowing the public to speak and digest the information and the counselors to digest the information. But I do agree with Council President Eigerman and some of the other counselors who have spoken that this is an emergency, and it's kind of the definition of an emergency. So I think moving it forward is in the best interest of public safety. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Wallace. So just so the counselors know, the order after the Department of Health speaks is going to be Councillor Zede. Councillor Connell, do you still have your hand up?
No, I do not.
Okay, so you might want to take your hand, raise your hand. Then it's to Councillor Zede, Councillor Vogel, and Councillor Tantar. But first, I'd like to hear from from Frank Jackalone. Frank, I think you're unmuted.
I am unmuted now, I believe.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. First off, I think that it looks like a lot of thought was put into this. However, it is very, very quick, and I only got this about an hour ago, so I can't fully comment on it. But a couple of things I do see in it, especially where it is stated that unless people from their own household basically walk the path and not be 6 feet away. I think that you're alienating a lot of people from that, meaning my sons don't live with me, but if I decide to take a walk with them, or my wife decides to walk with my son, they can't. So I think a lot of thought needs to be put in that. And I do agree, we are in a crisis situation. Never has there been something like this going on, where you have disease that does spread so quickly. But I think a lot of thought has to be put into the other aspect, the mental health issues that people who are quarantined or isolated, it's very bad for their mental health. You know, we can't just stop people from going out, but we do have to make sure that they're practicing social distancing when possible. And also I'll make reference to the governor's order. So in his order that got updated March 31st, the order does not apply to public gatherings of more than 10 people in an undisclosed outdoor space such as a park or field. I do agree that the mayor did ban that practice in those parks to try to limit the people going out there. However, things like the rail trail where people are biking past each other, they're not in direct contact. You're just passing by, and that's why even in grocery stores, you know, you have people in closer proximity, but you're not stopping, you shouldn't be stopping and chatting. So you're just walking by, and that needs to be taken into consideration. So again, I do agree in what this ordinance is about, again, to enforce the social distancing and stop the gathering. But I think you're going to be hurting a lot of people that I don't think were addressed in this order. And again, it's almost discriminatory to you know, families that don't live in the same household. How do you know, how is that fair? And it's going to be very difficult to enforce. That's the third point, between the marshals and myself, to put in there an animal control officer. That's fine. I do have them patrol those areas and ask that they do try to discourage a social distance, but that is, not actually an ACO function. It's a public health function.
Okay.
So as a union person, that could be affected also because it's not part of the her job description. So I
Okay.
just want to say that I agree with it. I'm sorry I'm going over. I agree with the intent. Yes, we need separation to stop the spread. However, I just wish that I was notified prior to this being drafted. Thank you.
All right, so the order that we're going to hear comment is Councillor Zede is next, and this is specific to the emergency preamble.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. So I am keeping my conversation here focused on the emergency preamble. I guess it's so hard to digest all these comments as you go through and you want to respond to all of them. But I think the question is as with everything, this is a balance, and what we're talking about here is we're talking about imbalancing the public's right to know, their right to participate, their right to be a part of the process, their right to weigh in, their right to hold their counselors accountable and to hear what they have to say, and make decisions on what they might feel about that counselor in the future, against public health. And I came into tonight fully expecting that almost every argument we would hear would be what I call the blood on your hand argument, which is that if you don't do this, then you are directly responsible for people's death. And I want to cut that off at the knees in this emergency preamble discussion. I will not listen to that, and I will not take that, and I will not accept that personally, because I don't think it's fair. There have also been many comments that quote things like, we've never seen this before. We have a long-standing history in American government of process, of constitutions, of state constitutions, of charters, and even to make one motion to waive both the charter, which is our guiding document for the city, as well as our city council rule, which we all agreed we needed 2 readings to pass an ordinance for a reason, is exactly the kind of test that these things were designed for. And, so yeah, you know what? We should have done this last week. We should have done this 2 weeks ago. I guess people say, well, we can't go back in time. We might as well do it now. But you are robbing people. And I think if there is an issue that rises to the level of importance to balance out against public health, civil rights is one of them. And the ability of people to move freely, and the ability of the police to question individuals who may be participating in an activity in a public park maybe should rise to that level. So this will be my final comment on the emergency preamble, and I look forward to having the further debate should this pass, but I remain in opposition.
Thank you, Councillor Zede. Next up is Councillor Vogel.
Thank you. The on just simply passing the emergency preamble and getting into discussion, we're not robbing anybody of anything. We are taking the opportunity under all of the rules, under all of that surrounds us, to have the debate on what we should do. The spirit of what is before us is really what's most important. If nothing comes from this, if we can get past the preamble and we can get into the merits of what we're discussing, then we can even have further discussion as to whether or not we should implement it immediately, or maybe put it off for another date and time, whatever it might be. But at least, if nothing else, and if Jack is listening, perhaps the big bold headline in tomorrow's paper will be City Council considering ... And that's the discussion that we have to have. By not having that discussion, and I tell you, I see this, I'm around town, believe me, and I see people, and I'm out there. We need to have this discussion. That's what the spirit of this ought to be.
Thank you, Councillor Vogel. Councillor Tantar.
Right, much to my embarrassment, I cited the wrong number. So I'm going to correct that. That's all I want to do. 1 week ago today, there were 72.24 cases in Essex County per 100,000 population. Today in Essex County, there are 209.49 cases per 100,000 population. About 3 times as many. In one day, since yesterday, there's been close to a 10% increase in cases. Again, that my argument is we can't wait a week. Certainly, I don't think we should wait a couple days to consider this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tontar. Councillor Khan.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was muted. Thank you, Madam President. I am going to still talk about the emergency preamble, and I have to respectfully disagree with some of the arguments I heard that we've, in terms of passing emergency preambles. I feel like we have, in my time here on the council, which has not been that extensive, we have passed emergency preambles for, in my opinion, matters that I'm not going to say are less serious, but matters that have come before us and have kind of proclaimed themselves as such that we had to bring up. In many cases, I did not support those. But the reason I am still going to support this emergency preamble is I do think, as other councilors may have said, that it does warrant the conversation. There's a lot of and I don't take this lightly in terms of the actions we need to take. I think when we last did an emergency to close the parks and the basketball courts and the tennis courts, I was not in favor because I felt like we were moving quickly and swiftly without really talking to the right organizations that would have to enforce. In that time, my opinion has significantly changed, mainly because of the number of emails, the number of conversations I'm having with people over the phone who are asking me, what are we doing to break up groups that are still congregating? I had someone today send me a picture of people doing a block party on their street. And so this is, you know, I do speak with residents through Facebook Live. I've been doing these weekly now meetings, and I did actually send out the information on this emergency meeting, and I posted it as many places as I can. I called a few people and told them it was happening, but I am trying to at least engage the residents as much as I can. So I am doing what I can to educate and get people out there. And again, I feel like I'm responding to already so many emails and telephone calls I'm getting about concern about some of these rules that the governor put in place that are not being followed. So again, please, I hope we could support this emergency preamble and start the conversation and go through what is in front of us and see where we could modify if it needs to be.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. So Councillor Lane, did you put your hand down?
I did, yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, so Councillor Devlin?
Yes. So in response to a couple of things, I am not saying I don't want to have this debate. I am not saying that this is not a crisis. I am not saying that this is not a debate worth having. I actually wrote down in notes in some of the public comments, I am, insulted at the suggestion that we're not taking this seriously if we don't pass this. And I think that's along the lines of what Councillor Zeid said about the blood on your hands. I actually have been observing since our March 16th meeting. I went back and looked at my running records. 18 of 21 days since then, I've run around areas where people congregate because I wanted to see roving gangs of teenagers. I wanted to see people down at the parks. Twice today, I drove around looking to see if there was an emergency, exigent circumstances of many, many people congregated around. I went at 12 today instead of eating my lunch, and I went at 5:30. And the most I saw were two people together. One, it could have been a brother and a older brother playing tennis. And I saw two kids shooting at the same basket with two separate basketballs earlier in the day. So I am not seeing these emergency circumstances in my 18 of 21 days where I've run and purposely run because of some emails that we have gotten suggesting that there will be blood on our hands because we haven't acted fast enough. I have purposely run around the areas downtown, Perkins Playground, Marches Hill, Cashman, the rail trail. I've made it out to Cherry Hill. And I'm running these places on purpose to see if there are people congregating there. And again, in 18 of 21 times doing it, I have not seen anything that has alarmed me. I haven't seen anything close to groups of 10 people. So again, I don't know. I'm not saying there's not a crisis here, but what you're doing, so to Councillor from my at-large brother, Vogel, I agree we should have this debate and we should have as many people listening to it as possible so that we can get their input. But unfortunately, I only got 7.5 hours to prepare for this. I'm sure there's lots of other people who aren't getting emails directly from the city who don't know about this but would like to comment on it. They should hear our debate tonight. That's the important part, to have them hear us debate. We've had discussions about this in the past, why so much has been debated in my time on the city council, why so much has been debated on the council chamber floors in our regular city council meetings. I will tell you, and I've said it before, I made a conscious decision to do that because that's the only thing that's recorded. And in committee meetings, one thing was being said, but when we got onto the cameras, different things were being said. And so I felt it was healthier to have the debate where the most amount of people can watch it. And I think we've all done a good job of that over the last 4.5 years. And again, exigent circumstances, like special circumstances, those are times when you have to maintain the most steadfast resolve on people's fundamental rights and processes and the democratic processes. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but you know, there's a political philosopher that said, you know, the emergency has been the basis of every erosion of individual liberties throughout history, because that's what you use the emergency. That's why we had Japanese internment camps, which I think we can all, you know, say that was an emergency back then, and said we have to pass this and we have to abrogate people's civil liberties to do that. Okay, and that was a time, frankly, where people were saying this has never happened to in the history of our country, where we've been attacked by another country. And I would think we would all say, in hindsight, that was an unjustified, infringement on people's rights. And you might think I'm being dramatic here, but I'm not. Most of the time, I think we take our jobs too seriously. I would say, I can say this pretty, you know, I have very little that anybody can contradict me on this. On this council and probably in this city, I have observed more city and town government over the last 15 years than anyone, by tenfold. And we take on more issues at our city council, more serious issues and we address more than I have ever seen anywhere else on a regular basis. And I pay attention to these things. And yet we're not taking ourselves seriously enough now. We are the stewards of constitutional rights right now and democratic rights right now. And what we're saying, and maybe you're going to disagree with me, but I do not think that this is an emergency. And I'll with my sister councilor at large, I'll disagree with her here. We have had many emergency preambles that have happened at our regular city council meetings. People are already tuned in to watch that, so we have a chance of having more people see it. But I will agree, those are much less serious. It's a road race that someone, or a race that a block party that someone forgot to bring us in time. But this has serious implications on people's individual liberties. And frankly, when that happens, I don't want to take your word that you've reached out to people through Facebook Live. Like, that's a closed group of people, to be honest with you. You know, I want to make sure the 48-hour notice is in there specifically to make sure that we don't do things without proper notice to the public so they can participate. And I won't belabor this anymore, but this is really, really important. And it's disappointing to me. I do feel like this, you just heard our health director say, I wish I had gotten this an hour earlier. We're in no different place than we were 3 weeks ago. When I said, I can't vote for this, is the health inspector on here? Is the marshal on here? Is the mayor on here? Is the parks commissioner on here? Are the people that are going to be charged with enforcing this and carrying this out, have we consulted them? And we hadn't. And we're right. I called the marshal this morning. I was the first person who let him know that this was happening. That is not proper preparation. If you've known that this has been a problem, everybody, we can't fill in for the mayor and then not do what the mayor is doing, which is consulting with her department heads on a regular basis. So again, I would ask that this council postpone this for 48 hours and give the public time to put in some input. It might be everybody is in agreement with you, but give the public and be steadfast on our democratic processes. Thank you.
All right. I know people are impassioned about this, but let's make sure that we're still treating each other with as much respect as we typically would on the floor of the council chambers. So the next on the list is Councillor Vogel.
Whatever you want to call me. So just to one simple, quick point. As I sit here in front of this computer and listening to the passion coming out of everybody, I watch the number of attendees grow to 54. I don't know that we've ever had that many people in council chambers. And this is on a issue that has come public at midday. Even subtracting out of it those that, quote, should know, that's a huge number of people listening and participating, and I greatly appreciate it. That's all.
All right. Councillor Lane.
Thank you. Councillor Vogel just echoed exactly what I'm saying. I mean, the list of attendees is 54. And I think Councillor Devlin is right that it is very critical right now, but the critical part being that we move forward and have this conversation to make our residents safe. And that's all I really have to say.
Okay. So there
Madam President?
Yes, Councillor Eigenman.
Okay. Is that all right? I can't raise my hand. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Go right ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify, I actually had a half-an-hour conversation with Director Giacalone on Saturday morning to talk about all kinds of these issues. One of the things we discussed is that the Board of Health is not meeting. So I don't think that this has been rash by the City Council to take action because this board is not even meeting. As far as giving notice, I did give direct notice to the Chief Executive Officer for the city, Mayor Holliday, last night. So not this morning. Before anybody talked to Marshall Murray, I talked to the Chief Executive and told her all about it. So, and I copied other people on that email. But what it comes down to, I think, is a disagreement. Again, I'll take it. You know, I read the rule literally. I believe there is a circumstance where the president can judge that the 48-hour notice is not necessary because there is, quote, an emergency. And that's what I did. And I recognize people are bitterly opposed to that determination that I made, but I did my best. And I don't really want to get into the constitutional issues on the preamble. I'm prepared to talk about them, but on this narrow issue of whether the president calling an emergency meeting on fewer than 48 hours, if that's a constitutional violation, I don't agree with that. I don't think there's any violation of procedural due process, given the emergency which has been declared by the governor and is notorious. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Eigenman. So I know there are no more councillors with their hands raised, but we do have a representative for the mayor's office. Chief of Staff Matt Coogan has his hand raised, so I'm going to let him speak before we take the vote. Matt Coogan, are you unmuted?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I guess what I want, just to keep it to your emergency preamble, I think one of the points that we want to make on the administration side is that as far as the nature of the emergency, I believe, and we all know the social distancing order from the governor has been in place for a while. So it sounds to me that the emergency preamble right now is about the fact that there's still folks, or that we're hearing reports of people not abiding by that. So it seems like the emergency right now is about the enforcement. And with enforcement and what the penalties will be, not to get, I mean, we can obviously discuss that, the actual content of the order if the council wants to proceed. But the enforcement, obviously has it's about the allocation of our first responders. And I do want to be sensitive to that. And we do have the marshal on the call who can answer questions. But, I think that, I think the council president did mention that he did give notice to the mayor that they were considering this order, but the city marshal and the health director really haven't had the time to really understand what this means as far as enforcement. And we actually are currently doing enforcement, and I think we would as administration love to have that conversation with the councilors. And figure out how we can improve it, and to let you understand what we've been doing over the course of several weeks. But I think that with and then combined with the the noticing of this meeting, I think that it does have significant consequences that we don't really fully know yet as far as the penalty structure and the enforcement structure. With some more time, we could probably have a better understanding of those consequences, really tighten this ordinance up so it's feasible, it's practical, it's enforceable, and it gets the product that we all want. Because I think what we all want is folks to abide by the social distancing rules. So I think that's where I'll leave it right now. And that I think the administration wants to be working with the council and be in step as far as how we get these things done. And I'll let the council decide whether or not it's an emergency. Those are my comments for now.
Thank you, Mr. Coogan. So at this time, there's no one else with their hand raised. So, Mr. Jones,
Shall we go to a roll call vote, Councilor Shan?
Yes, please.
So this is a roll call vote on the approval of the emergency preamble and a waiver of the rules, specifically 9B. Ready? Councilor Wallace.
Yes.
Councilor Zeid.
No.
Councilor Devlin.
No.
Councilor Khan.
Yes.
Councilor Lane.
Yes.
Councilor McCauley.
Yes.
Councilor Connell.
Yes.
Councilor Shan.
Yes.
Councilor Tantar. Councilor Tantar, you are muted. I'll come back to Councilor Tantar. Councilor Eigenman.
Yes.
Councilor Vogel.
Yes.
Councilor Tantar, you are now unmuted.
Yes, sorry.
So having 2 no, needing 8, the motion passes. We are now discussing ordinance 56 in its present form. Councilor Shan, shall I introduce the ordinance, or do you prefer to?
You are more than welcome to.
So I don't think I need go over the whereases because they were much a part of the emergency preamble, but I do think I should go to the substance of the matter, which is as follows. After the now, therefore, this is on page 2 of 3 pages. Banned activities and required personal distances. Through May 4th, it shall be unlawful at, upon, or within any public building, right-of-way, park, playground, or beach under the jurisdiction of the city, including without limitation those public parks and playgrounds identified in the code. 1, for more than 10 people to gather for any purpose, whether indoors or out. 2, for any person to use any playground or play equipment or any athletic or sports equipment or field, court, or other area, including without limitation, a tennis court, basketball court, baseball field, soccer field. And 3, for any person to stand, sit, walk, jog, run, or otherwise be located within 6 feet of any other person with whom such person does not reside in a household, including a group home, excepting solely those persons responding to an emergency in an official capacity, and in accordance with applicable law, such as personnel of the city's fire department, police, DPS, physicians, nurses, emergency medical technicians, and repair personnel for public utilities. B, suspension of licenses and permits for use, public properties, or events. This in essence says that any license that was issued by the city council or by any city officers hereby suspended, and they talk about parades, road races, block parties, etc., or within any public building, right-of-way, park, playground, beach, under the jurisdiction, including without limitation, public parks and playgrounds, etc., as defined under the code, through May 4th. C, this gets to penalties and violations. I don't think I need to read the whole thing. Suffice it to say that the first violation is a $125 fine. Subsequent violations are $250 second offense, $500 third offense, $1,000 fourth and subsequent violations. The revenues collected hereunder shall be used to defray cost to the city incurred due to the COVID-19 declared emergency. Effective date for this ordinance would be 12 p.m. On Tuesday, that's noontime Tuesday, April 7th, as in tomorrow. This is, there's a severability clause. There's 3 sponsoring counselors, Councilors Lane, Eigenman, and Tontar. And Ms. President Pro Tem, I think that's a fair synopsis unless you'd like me to do something more.
Nope, I think you summed it up well. Thank you. So for the counselors who would like to discuss this, we also do have Marshall Murray and the health director still online who are unmuted.
Okay.
So
Let me just kick it off with a motion to approve, see if I can get a second.
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 So we had plenty of seconds. The first second was whom?
Councillor Khan.
Thank you. Councilor Eigenman and Councilor Khan. So the motion approves on the floor.
So Councillor Zede has his hand up first.
Thank you, Madam President. So I wanted to make my comments now that we are able to do so on the merits. First thing is I just want to remind everybody that thanks to the previous motion that just passed, not only do we have an emergency allowing for discussion, but apparently we've also empowered ourselves to pass this ordinance in just one reading, something that was sacred enough to us that we actually instituted a rule once we did to require the 2 readings, once we discovered that our charter didn't actually explicitly require it. So this is the big game, this is the big show, and apparently we are prepared to move forward on this in just one reading. So first thing I need to do before I go through my comments is just preface my comments with 2 things. One is, unfortunately, we're in a position tonight where we're going to be debating largely on anecdotal evidence. So you're going to hear from some counselors that they've driven around and witnessed the worst things ever seen. You're going to hear from others that they've also been around and they have not witnessed the same things, which is basically essentially a joke for a basis of this public health discussion. But this is where we find ourselves. My personal take on it, having also observed, is that I think the residents of Newburyport are taking positive steps by and large, and certainly it's not that there's never an exception to anything, but that there has been a lot of taking this very seriously, and seen that in my neighborhood with my neighbors, seen that around as I've been out for walks with my family, which is something that would be very germane to this conversation. And they're doing it at great pain. I also want to, praise the Newburyport Police Department. I think that this discussion is going to put them in a tough place, and I don't think they deserve that. And I think that needs to be considered, and that none of my comments tonight are any reflection of the Newburyport Police Department. This has to do with the policy that's in front of us, not the department, not any of its officers or anything like that. And last but not least is I've heard quite a few comments just to preface this, about the governor's order. The governor's order is really not an order, it's an advisory. In many cases, the stay at home, for example, is an advisory. The governor has not created a right for police officers at the local or state level to pull people over and to question them as far as where they are going, where they've come from, who they're riding with, etc. I also want to remind everybody that no one on the city council has a public health background whatsoever. I don't even know that any of us are in the medical space at all or practice medicine or anything like that. So you're also going to hear consistent, okay, I can read a chart of cases as well. I can draw conclusions from that as an intelligent person, but I'm not a public health professional. The next piece is I want to be very unequivocal and clear about my position. I am not going to support this piece of legislation or any piece of legislation which is going to enable our police officers to stop, question, and fine 2 children who are playing catch in a ball field, or to stop and question 2 people who are walking down the street, running or jogging, to ask them if they're related, to ask them if they know each other, to ask them where they might be going or what they're doing. And that is what this bill says. That's exactly what this bill says. While the city clerk did a great job of summarizing it, we need to be crystal clear about exactly what this ordinance is saying. It's saying that the police officers are going to be able to question people who are in more than a group of 10. Anybody who is using any athletic court, sports equipment, field, court, or area, any public way, which is all of the streets in Newburyport, believe it or not, tennis courts, basketball courts, baseball fields. So in a couple of the anecdotes we heard where we hear about somebody playing basketball by themselves or a couple of runners who happen to be out running together, related or not, are subject to question. And that's exactly what this ordinance says, and I'm not going to support that. This crosses a new line between an advisory position and more of an enforceable kind of position. I realize that's what the sponsors want, but this can and will create constitutional issues, and I don't think our police officers deserve to be put in that position. Next piece I want to cover is that I don't believe that this actual proposal has merit. People need to get out of their homes. They need to get out. Everybody understands that we're in the midst of a pandemic. And while others will, again, read off cases in an effort to make the argument that the blood will be on our hands for not passing things like this, there are also consequences to people being unable to leave their homes or in being severely limited in doing so. And there are plenty of ways that parks and public ways can be enjoyed at social distance, even between people who are not related. You heard a little bit of the leading edge of this from our public health director, mental health challenges that will arise from this, anxiety. There was a large article in the New York Times about an uptick in domestic violence cases. There are other bad things that can happen to people, and coronavirus isn't the only one and can't be treated like the only one. Closing everything, if you close everything, including fields, or you make motions like this, you're only going to put pressure on other areas that people feel they can go to, increasing the numbers there, which will actually lead to a negative impact on our public health endeavor here, which is really to get people to self-follow these rules, because even if you had a full military order and you said everybody's going to stay in their house, it still would be very difficult to be enforced. So I think that actually, ironically, a very real possibility is that this proposal will have a negative impact on our public health, not a positive impact, by isolating and further causing people to have to stay in their homes, which will have collateral damage. I stand strongly opposed to this as it's written. I have read it several times. I know exactly what it says because I'm reading the words, and I know that the sponsors and the author did not sloppily write these words, and under banned activities, it's very clear. So those are my comments at this time. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councillor Z. The next hand that was up was Councillor Lanes. Councillor Lane, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Technically, if you're not related, you could technically be questioned, and then depending on the circumstances, get fined.
So, Councillor Z.
Well, if you don't live in the same house, sorry.
No, it's one of the participants that's speaking.
Okay.
Partners outside of the home. So you live.
If you're not Councillor Lane, can you please mute yourself?
I think we're good. Again, as I spoke to before, I hope this to be a constructive conversation on things we can do. I don't see any part of this where it's stop and frisk, and I feel like that's taking it very black and white in terms of what the goal of this is. People are not adhering to the social distancing. I hear it all over town. So yes, I will tell that story of, I've seen people tailgating. I've seen people riding bikes stopped, kids stopped all over the place. not adhering to the rules. The crux of this is that we have already shut down these things and they're still being used. What I hope this to be is an enforcement tool where through community policing and presence that these groups disperse, or at least the message is delivered. So I can understand, you know, some of I can understand both sides of the spectrum on this thing. I totally can. And I just hope that this stays constructive. And if there is an issue with a piece of this, that we suggest something that would make more sense in someone else's eyes. That's all I ask for now.
All right, thank you, Councillor Lane. Councillor Khan?
Thank you, Madam President. I am in support of this. I mentioned some of my reasoning before. One of the things I did just want to respond or just maybe pose out there is the governor's order, the stay-at-home order, did also identify the enforcement and some penalties that can be some fines that the Department of Public Health can enforce through this order. And, you know, the first offense being a warning, the second one, a civil fine up to $300, with the third offense being up to $500 or imprisonment, which, you know, does seem very harsh. But when I saw this, I did send an email to Marshall Murray just kind of asking how is this type of, how does one reconcile that this order but from the governor does provide these guidelines? They're seen as the guidance from the Department of Public Health. And I was just kind of curious on how that enforcement happens. So part of what I see this effort here doing is actually just really, again, emphasizing what the governor's order does and providing some, maybe some more direct guidance, more for the public as well as for the departments on what one can do to be more mindful of these social distancing orders that are actually already there. The second point I want to bring up, and I think it's an important one mainly for me, is a question to the authors of the order is the penalties here are different than those stated by the governor. So if anything, I would like to hear maybe on how those numbers came about and a reasoning for why we're not just mapping to what was recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. So the next hand that was up was Councillor Connell, but before that, Councillor Eigenmann, do you want to answer Councillor Khan's question? Or any of the sponsors for that matter?
Yeah, I can answer the question. So I have in front of me the revised guidance regarding the order by the governor prohibiting assemblages. So I see what the councilor is referring to. This was issued by Monica Burrell, the Commissioner of Public Health, on May 23rd. And it says violations of this order shall be punished in the following manner. First offense shall result in a warning. Second is $300. Further offenses are which are repeated and willful may be subject to criminal penalties, including a fine of $500 or a term of imprisonment or both. And it was a conscious attempt as the drafter of mine not to make this a criminal offense. So these are only civil penalties that are possible. And we use that mechanism many places in our municipal code where we impose fines. I did consider having the first offense be a warning, but my understanding is, that's some of what's been going on already, is warnings have been issued, and at times the police have been trying to, tell people to disperse. So I deliberately did not start with a warning. I wanted to start empowering them to give tickets, and I deliberately did not follow the state scheme, which involves criminal penalties.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eigenmann. Councillor Connell?
Yes, thank you, President Pro Tem. I have two comments. One in response to a comment that was made previously about this putting our police in a very difficult, or the enforcement officials, whoever they may be, in a difficult position. I see this quite differently. And that is, I think what it does is give them a sense that we have some confidence in the exercise of judgment by those people who are responsible for enforcing something. And it's important for them to know that they can act in a a public interest in a case such as this. There are lots of reasons to be cautious about the imposition of enforcement activities. I think in this case, I think that their training, their supervision, and the judgment that they have traditionally exercised merits our support at this time. The second thing I want to say is that I had some specific questions about Section B, having raised the question of events in our previous meeting. I was pleased to see that Section B addressed that issue, particularly since it has been modified to include a written order of the city's health director subject to amendment and repeal by order of the city council. So I'd like to move to the violations and penalties section, if you would bear with me for a moment. The list of individuals or groups of individuals who might be in an enforcement position, I think is worth some debate. Right now, it's without limitation police officers, animal control officers, and park enforcement officers. I think we should be cautious about empowering folks whose training is not as rigorous as that of our police officials. And it's worth thinking that particular section of the violations and penalties paragraph through a little more closely. I'm not sure that our animal control officers, and I'm just speaking off the cuff here, I could be persuaded otherwise, are necessarily as well trained and equipped to impose violations of this type for the kind of offenses that are discussed. And that's all I have to say right now.
All right, so I see that the next hand up was Councillor Vogel's, Lanes, and then Zeed's again. I would like to take the opportunity, though, to have Marshall Murray comment on the last piece that Councillor Connell brought up. Marshall Murray, are you still on?
Well, if I may, I wanted to get my name in there too before you go back around to
Okay.
Zeke.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Igerman. I've got you on there. Marshall Murray, are you on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you speak to Councillor Connell's question and the ordinance in general? You can get your opinion here.
So can you repeat that question again, Counselor?
Can you speak to the animal control officers being people that should be allowed to go and find somebody for, okay. And if you have any comments about the ordinance in general?
Yeah, well, first of all, I found it a little disheartening that I just found out about this today, and neither myself or the health director were consulted on this, so I found out at 11 o'clock this morning. I just want to echo what the health director did state. We are seeing an uptick in mental illness, depression, anxiety, also fear because of this disease. And I understand the seriousness of it. I understand the social distancing. We all understand that. But the community needs to take a responsibility as well. And enforcement is going to be very difficult on this ordinance. We need to educate. We need to continue to educate. We're not putting signs up. We're not putting signs up throughout the community regarding this. We need to educate the public on this. So, and that's the first thing we should have been doing. Going right to a fine is not going to solve the problem.
Okay. All right. Councillor Vogel. Thank you, Marshall Murray.
Thank you, Madam President. I've gone through this a couple of times and have read through it, and I have a couple, without necessarily amending, I have some thoughts that I would hope would be discussed. I'm on the fence as to whether to support it or not, particularly as it stands straight out, and I'll tell you why. I think that the health director's comments about the relationship between people living in the same household As he mentioned, his stepchildren versus the children that live in homes. I think that certainly needs to be addressed as to who can be there. What about a babysitter who doesn't live in the home, is not an au pair, but is, just somebody who's babysitting? If I'm a runner and I'm out there with, not keeping my social distance, and I'm out there without any identification and I'm stopped, and I'm not particularly one of high moral regard, do I give my name or do I give somebody else's name? So there's some holes in it that I'm not particularly comfortable with, that I would like to see either addressed or backed down. I caught the word willful from the counselor from Ward 2's comments about he did not use the word, he used the word willful. And I think that somewhere in there that could work. That would help sort of soften it a little bit, if you will, even though willful is a strong word. Behavior that is innocent, or behavior that is not necessarily recognized by the group that they're with, that they're necessarily violating the issues. And it speaks to Marshall Murray's point on education. If you're just there and you're just, oh, shoot, I didn't even realize it. That's sort of different than somebody out there just willfully violating it. There were a group of kids the other day at Tracy Place Park, three boys, all huddled together on the bench, doing their normal teenage thing and vaping and so on and so forth. That type of behavior needs to be addressed. And the education piece, if nothing else comes from this tonight, again, I go back to the paper, headlines, 6 inches tall, council considering, this. So I'd like to, continue the conversation and at least pull out some of these things that are a little bit troublesome for me, because I do support the whole concept. I'm just not certain I support it with these many words, and I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the dollar amounts of the violations and so forth. Thank you. That's all for now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eigenman.
Yes, I'm one of the sponsors, so forgive me for speaking at length, but I got to cover a lot of stuff. So first, it is true that I wrote the language very carefully. One thing I also want to point out is it is absolutely meant to be a law, and it recognizes that what the governor imposed was just an advisory. Now, as I read before, Monica Burrell, the commissioner, she has something which is enforceable, but it doesn't do exactly what we're doing. It only covers gatherings of more than 10 people, and it doesn't necessarily forbid 2 kids playing with a ball. That was an example given. And yes, this would do that. This would prevent 2 children from engaging in athletics on public property. My understanding is that was our current policy, but it doesn't have any teeth. So I don't want to dodge that. It does not require people to stay in their homes, and it doesn't keep them from jogging, as long as they're 6 feet apart. I disagree. Again, it's just my opinion. I disagree with the health director that there needs to be an exception for people that are somehow close to each other socially, but don't live in the same household. I don't think that's the state of science. That's not what I've seen in orders from the governor, from the health director. From the health commissioner for Massachusetts or in other cities and states. They are drawing a line between people that reside together and so have no choice but to communicate pathogens and others. So that's sort of the essence of stay at home. I think there's a misunderstanding of the violations and penalties. Again, the language is careful. The only officers of the city that are empowered to enforce, and we do this for all kinds of health requirements. For example, dog droppings not being picked up, snow and ice not being removed for sidewalks. The 3 officers are the health director, the city marshal, and the parking clerk. And then it's their designees. It's up to them. The word designee, they have to designate. So if the health director doesn't want to designate ACO, the animal control officer, and again, as he stated at the outset of the meeting, they actually are hoping to have ACOs do more patrols. That's what he said. He doesn't have to. And the parking clerk also, if the parking clerk decides that parking enforcement officers, you know, it's appropriate for them to enforce people who don't shovel their sidewalks in a snow emergency, but it's not appropriate here, that's left to the parking clerk. That's what the language says. As far as ambiguity, the only thing that I'm worried about that I heard was biking on a public way. I don't read that as using a playground or play equipment or an athletic field. But if we need to clarify that, you know, that makes a lot of sense. No one's trying to stop people from biking. We just want them to stay 6 feet apart and in groups fewer than 11. And that's what the ordinance says. Another thing I don't want to get into a long discussion of the case law, but you know, it is meaningful that there is long case law on this. And again, it boils down to whether the legislature believes there's an emergency. You know, I believe there is. I believe there is. And the author of that decision is a very famous justice named Harlan, John Marshall Harlan. And the reason why that's important is that he was really the pioneer of civil rights at the U.S. Supreme Court. He was the first one ever to argue, first in dissent, that the Bill of Rights even applied to the states. That's now, of course, the prevailing view. He was the lone dissenter in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, when all the other justices upheld racist Jim Crow laws, and he said, no, that violates civil rights. He wrote the majority opinion in 1897, when for the first time the Supreme Court said that government states cannot take private property without paying just compensation. That's what we call the Takings Clause. He is the father of that. So he also wrote this Jacobson decision, which involves Massachusetts. And the case has to do with a mandatory order with criminal penalties, where the prisoner was put in jail in the city of Cambridge for refusing to be vaccinated for smallpox. And it's a very long decision, and it is still, 116 years later, the landmark decision on these issues. And you can compel people to be vaccinated. You can invade their person. And that's not what we're doing here. I want to be clear. You know, we have a policy where our playgrounds and our sports fields have supposedly been closed for the last 3 weeks. The purpose of the ordinance is to add teeth to that. Now, fines may not be a perfect deterrence, but I do think it's valid to try. Now, what the marshal has raised is a different issue, which is that maybe it's not worth trying. You know, maybe the danger to the public of a pandemic disease doesn't outweigh the harm to mental health. That's the argument he's making. But what I'm telling you is, and I've given the citations, and I know others will disagree, but I am very confident that from that decision, which is still the law, that there are occasions where, to quote the justice, in a well-ordered society, that the safety of the many outweighs the hope of a few. And it is not true that you have unfettered liberty. It's always liberty under law. And the example that he gave in the decision in upholding the mandatory vaccination was an American citizen arriving in an American port on a ship, which during the voyage there have been some cases of yellow fever. But the person himself is apparently entirely free from disease. Still, it's constitutional and rational to quarantine. And by the way, quarantine means 40 days. That's what the word means. That's not what we're doing here. It's not what we're doing here. I believe this is an emergency situation. We don't want our local health facilities to be overwhelmed. Yes, we have a suggested set of guidances that the governor has issued. I believe that that's not sufficient. And all a court is ever going to look for is that there's some rational connection between preventing large groups from communicating disease and imposing fines to try to deter it. And I do think, even though it's not necessary legally, this is narrowly tailored. We're not regulating behavior in private, say in people's homes. You know, they can do what they want there. This is in public places. It doesn't even ban use of our parks and streets. This is not a shutdown of public areas. It just says stay in groups of 10, stay 6 feet apart unless you're living together. It does not impose a quarantine. It doesn't penalize anyone who want to leave their homes. There are no criminal penalties whatsoever, just civil fines. And we're giving a tool to our enforcement officers, which always they have the discretion to apply that law in their reasonable judgment. That's the way it always is. With that, I'll close. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eigenman. Councillor McCauley.
Thank you, Madam President. Just have a couple of comments to make. I too have observed that the majority of our citizens are in compliance. There are a minority of folks that are not. And I would agree that the governor has, the governor's order are advisory and we should take them to heart. But I want to deviate a little bit. Our Constitution ensures that citizens' rights are protected. I take my role with respect to public safety very seriously. However, let's remember that people themselves are the ones that are primarily responsible for their safety. We are entrusted with vast freedoms as citizens to go to work, to travel, to go to church, to recreate, to hoard toilet paper, to stay at home. All of these things are, in a way, being stepped upon. We need to make the decision to social distance, to wear masks. Government's role is to provide these guidelines for the safety and balance and control of civil liberties. I believe the ordinance as written takes us a half a step over that line. We shouldn't use the power of law enforcement to infringe on basic civil liberties, even if they're acting like COVIDians. I will vote no on this ordinance as written. My suggestions will be in section A, number 3, person, that paragraph that begins with persons, to strike that. I think that's a little bit too much for me. And I would, in section C, I would suggest that everything past respective designees, including without limitation, police officers, etc., be stricken, and up to the point of are expressly authorized would be okay. And when, if we're going to move towards this, we're basically trying to send a message not only to the city but the administration. We need to determine what that message is. And we can't be reactionary for every time that we find someone not conforming to what we think we should be doing, right? Again, the balance of civil liberties. So I would urge us all, if we are to send that message, to send the message that we're all in this together. We do need to apply social distancing. I do embrace what the Marshal has stand for in educating some more our folks out in the field. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McCauley. The next ones who have not spoken yet are in this order: Councillor Wallace, Councillor Devlin, then Councillor Tantar, and then I'll come back to Councillor Khan, Zeid, and Lane. So Councillor Wallace.
Thank you. From a more practical perspective, as a ward councillor, I have been getting a lot of calls and emails, people concerned about people on the field, or I've seen people on tennis courts, or kids riding bikes where they shouldn't. And I feel the need for some sort of enforcement. I say to them, this is advisory. The residents are confused. They think it's a law, but it's not a law. I would like to have somebody who's looking over these spaces. It doesn't matter to me if it's necessarily a police officer. We don't have park rangers, but right now we don't even have signs in some of these areas. And I 100% agree with the marshal that we need education. I think, with all due respect to everything that's going on in the city, I think we can do better with education. You know, if it comes down to needing officers, then so be it. If we can't find other ways to enforce this. But the way I see it is not necessarily fining people, but just someone to come up, explain to these people, we can't do this. And most, 99% of the time they'll disperse. And I'll tell you, if a police officer shows up, they're really going to disperse. But the fact that the marshal said he hasn't had enough time to review it, nor has the health director felt they've had time to review it. I have a question to perhaps the council president. What is the procedure if we wanted to give this another 48 hours and come back, in 2 days and hash out these details and find out something that can work for everybody? And I yield with that.
If I may, Madam President, just answer the rule question.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a motion to postpone. So the rule, as I understand it, and it's actually Councillor Shand who has to agree, or we have to overrule her by 2/3. The rule says by a bare majority, any councillor can, if they have the floor, you can't interrupt. You can make a motion to postpone. You can postpone to later in the same meeting. You can postpone as late as our next regular meeting or earlier, but you can't go later than the next regular meeting, is my understanding.
Do you have any other questions, Councillor Wallace? Councillor Wallace, you're muted.
I do not have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, to continue the discussion, the next person has not spoken was Councillor Devlin.
Madam President, I'd be willing, I still want to keep my hand up, but I would be willing to listen to more input from others before I speak, if that's possible.
Okay, we'll
I'd
come
like
back to you then.
defer my hand raising.
Okay, I will put you at the end of the line then. Councillor Tantar, you were next.
Yeah, I'm going to echo Councillor Devlin, and I'd like to hear what others say first.
Okay. All right, Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to respond to a few things. And I know there was a comment earlier about none of us being public health experts, and definitely I am not. Unfortunately, I'm stuck at home with one, good or bad. And every morning at 7:30, I have to hear him talking on his meetings that they have amongst all the hospitals. I also know that as a gastroenterologist, he's going to be deployed to a respiratory clinic. So while I may not be a public health expert, I am definitely hearing every day in this household the serious nature of this pandemic. And I'm going to repeat, it is a pandemic. We are in a place where, yes, it feels like we're actually infringing on many things. Businesses have been commanded to shut down. Physicians have been commanded to not do what they were trained in, but to do other areas of work that they are now trying to get them up to speed on. This is not, I'm telling you, and I'm going to repeat this several times tonight, this is not a typical situation, nor is it anything that I have ever seen before the City Council in terms of the serious public safety nature here. Yes, this is dramatic. I am looking through this, and I've been perusing this since I got this in my inbox, this ordinance. And it is, to me, I never would have thought we would have to do this, to be absolutely honest. It just is, it's hard. I have kids too, a 13 and 10-year-old. They have friends. There's playgrounds just half a block away from our home. And so, yes, we are in a very unusual situation, but there, you know, we talked about education, which I've always said, yes, let's educate the public. Let's keep this in committee a little longer so we could get more public input. That has always been my mantra. But in this situation, education has been rampant all around us. But you know what? I have not seen behavior change. And unfortunately, we are in a situation where we just need to ride through what I see as really a limited time period. I don't see this being the way it's going to be for the next 6 months. I pray it's not going to be that way. But if we don't put some teeth into what has already been stated, recommended, school committee sending out, or not school committee, superintendent, you know, we have already been doing that kind of messaging, but we don't see anything changing. The only thing I would, and I want to speak to one thing, and I don't know, I don't want to take up a lot of my time, but A3, that actually is a critical piece to keep in here. And I do also respectfully disagree with the Director of Public Health on this, or because the residing in a household and people in a household is really where you can relax the 6 feet apart. I have friends who are in college visiting their parents, and they are actually keeping a 6 feet distance from them, from their parents, because they don't live in the same home. They don't know what they are each being exposed to. So I actually think A3 is critical to keep here. I also believe, though, the fines that we have are harsh. And I am willing, if we are ready to make some amendments here, I am in section C. For section C1, I'd like to propose and actually make that first violation $25. I really do. I mean, again, I'm thinking of the people and going up to someone, and I think 125, especially when people are hurting in terms of work, I don't think 125 makes sense. I think for a first violation, the state guidance is a warning. I think if we want to give it a little bit of teeth, I think $25 is what I would love to amend that to. And actually, you know what? I'll just start there. I would like to propose an amendment of C1 to be $25.
I'll second.
I'll accept
right.
it as friendly.
Friendly amendment?
I'd accept that.
All right. Mr. Jones?
Councilor Shan, so we have a first and a second. It's a friendly acceptance, but that needs a second also. So it's probably easier just to take a vote on the motion to amend to reduce the first violation from 125 to 25.
Is there a discussion on this, though, right?
And absolutely.
Okay. Discussion on the amendment. Do we want to keep going with the current list? We have Councillor Z, Councillor Lane, Councillor Devlin, and Councillor Tantar, and then Councillor Vogel.
I guess if I'm next, I still have other comments I wish to make, Madam President, and I would be happy if we can resolve the amendment. But if I could be recognized at the conclusion of that process, I would be grateful.
Okay, so I will have you come back around after we resolve the amendment.
Councilor Vogel would like to speak to the amendment.
Okay, Councillor, well, before you go, Councillor Lane, Devlin, or Tantar, did you want to speak to the amendment?
No.
Okay, Councillor Vogel?
So my question, I would be in favor of lowering the first violation. My question would be, and maybe it actually goes just a little bit beyond the amendment, sorry. What's the action if the person doesn't pay? I just have that one question. What happens if you hand a violation to somebody and there's no payment down the road? Is that the same thing as a parking ticket? Is that, what happens to it?
Want me to give a try at that?
Please.
It is different from a parking ticket. A parking ticket has the registry of motor vehicles behind it, if you will. In other words, they need to pay a parking ticket because they can't renew their license or registration. This wouldn't have that. It would mean that ultimately, I think they would either need to be prosecuted by the police under an applicable code violation section, which there is and which has happened. It's unusual, but it does not have the same teeth.
If I may follow up, Madam President?
Yes, Councillor Vogel.
So in other words, it just kind of hangs out there, and at some point in time, it could come back and haunt somebody or not, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of.
Well, Madam President, can I
Yep, go right ahead.
say something on that?
Thank you.
Yeah, so again, the ordinance refers to General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 21D,
Yep.
which is pretty long, actually. I don't want to read the whole thing, but there's a whole process. You know, they're given notice to appear and contest the violation. It goes to a district court and so on and so forth. So there's process. That's the advantage of citing Section 21D. It's already settled.
Thank you.
Very good.
With that, I'll close my comments. I would be in support of the amendment.
Okay, so we still have Councillor Zede, Lane, Devlin, and Tantar. Are there any other folks who want to speak to the amendment? All right, so if there are no folks that want to speak to the amendment, we should probably take a roll call vote on the amendment.
Take a roll call, which is amending section C1 from $125 to $25. Councillor Wallace,
Yes.
Councillor Zede,
Yes.
Councillor Devlin,
No.
Councillor Khan,
Yes.
Councillor Lane,
Yes.
Councillor McCauley,
Yes.
Councillor Connell,
Yes.
Councillor Shan,
Yes.
Councillor Tantar,
Yes.
Councillor Vogel,
Yes.
Councillor Agaman.
Yes.
10-1, amendment passes. The ordinance is now amended on section C1. There's a standing motion to approve on the floor.
So do we want, all right, help me out here, Mr. Johns. Do we continue with the discussion?
Absolutely. Continue with the discussion on the motion to approve as,
All right.
as amended.
As amendment. All right, so the next one in line, we are going back to Councillor Zede.
Thank you. So again, just as we go around the circle here and continue, number one is with all due respect, public health is a body of study, and I respectfully disagree in a lot of cases that other medical professionals offer the same level of opinion on something that is its study of all of its own. People get masters in public health and PhDs in public health. So I just, that's not any sort of personal comment. It's just my view that it's important that we recognize that there are some differences here. And obviously people disagree with our own public health director, which I suppose is everybody's prerogative. But I wanted to mention that. So that's number one. Number two is, I think, this concept of unprecedented times and, the Constitution, and we never thought we would have to do this and so forth is a challenging argument for me because actually, the United States Constitution has seen several pandemics and, Newburyport's not exactly a new city. It's actually one of the things that we're proud of. So this isn't the first pandemic that Newburyport has seen. These are the times when the letter of the law matters, and that this is the time when it's like integrity. It's easy to do the right thing when it's an easy situation, and it's a hard thing to do when it's a hard situation. So I find myself struggling to accept those arguments as valid here. And I don't really know where this stops. I really, I'm curious to hear from the sponsors why we stopped here. In the city of Boston, now the mayor's talking about curfews. Will that be our next emergency meeting tomorrow night to have curfews from 9 to 6? What is the end game here, and where does the role of enforcement stop? And so that's my second comment. My third comment is I think there's a lot of ways to polish this and sort of talk about this in a way that it makes it seem like we're not, that there's plenty of previous legal history for this and we're not taking anything away, or that it's not as big a deal because it's been done before. And there's some skillful ways to talk about that, but I respectfully disagree. And I think especially the fact that we're sitting here on a Zoom meeting, many of us from the comfort of our homes, wherever you might be, I don't know. And we're talking about this like it's just an easy thing for the city's police department to enforce. Here are some examples for you. If a police officer drives by Perkins Park and observes 4 kids playing catch on the ball field, what's the expectation under this ordinance? The police officer is going to stop and pull the kids in and say, hey, what are you guys doing? Are you all related to each other? This would actually be illegal entirely for those 4 kids to play catch at a distance of 20 feet from one another. I suppose they're all touching the same ball. I don't know how far or how deep this rabbit hole is supposed to go, but that would be illegal. 2 siblings out for a run. Yes, next to each other. So they're running next to each other down Water Street or Merrimack Street. What's the expectation that a cruiser is going to stop and detain or hold those 2 individuals for a moment while they are questioned as to who they are and to ensure that they are able to prove that they're siblings? How about driving by one of our city's parks, maybe Atkinson Common or maybe Atwood, and you're seeing 2 adults sitting on a park bench and they're sitting next to each other? Evidently, that would require some enhanced interrogation in order for the police officer to determine if they live in the same household. I suppose they'd have to show their driver's license in order to prove one way or the other. How about 2 people playing tennis at the Knock Middle School? So there's a tennis court there. So the officer drives by and observes 2 individuals playing tennis, standing approximately, what's the distance of a tennis court? 30 feet plus. So how are we going to ascertain the status of that? And again, that's basically illegal here under this ordinance. That would be banned. So I suppose everybody's getting a fine at that point. 9 family members taking a photo on a beach. I guess that's subject to enforcement as well. A family of 4 shooting hoops on a local basketball court. Now, again, the sponsors and many others will argue that these are wacky, and I'm out there in left field and I have no right perhaps to ask about these things. But these are ignoring the realities on the ground. Police officers are driving around in cruisers. They are observing these things from afar, and there's no reasonable way to enforce this. And I think that's what you heard a little bit from the marshal. I'm not going to put words in his mouth. I have not spoken to him directly, but I think anybody with common sense could see that this is really above and beyond what anybody would reasonably expect. And as I said in my earlier comments, I wouldn't be supporting something where we're going to expect either police officers to do this and then, I guess, exercise their discretion, which I concur they do have, and they do exercise discretion against folks who are doing some of the simple examples that I've mentioned. These are exactly the situations. These are exactly the cases where the laws were made for. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Z. Next up is Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Madam President. I just to answer real quick, the Ward 1 councillor, I understand a lot of those situations. It sounds extreme to me, and I understand that. Primarily I've done that job. I've been in the cruiser before. I've driven around, and I know we have a good group of people in our police department, and I'd be comfortable with them pulling up. And the way I'd envision this is with this tool that enables them to stop and say something. If there's a group of 6 to 8 kids on a bike, just hanging out, yeah, they can pull up and they can ask them, you guys just got to move along. This actually gives them another tool, and in the respect that it's not them going out there and doing this on their own. This is something that the city's putting into play. So real easily, an officer can go up and say, hey guys, you know what? I get it. Everybody's kind of going crazy, but move along. Okay, I'm not asking about stop and frisk and, stopping people in mid-run. It clearly spells out that people in motion just stay in motion. Don't congregate and observe the 6-foot rule. I'm not trying to take away people's civil liberties here. I'm not trying to, put something written in stone for all eternity that, this is how it is and we're going to send the Gestapo to make sure this happens. I want the police to have the tools in place to back them up, to stop if there's a group hanging out, on the courts at Cashman Park, and they shouldn't be there. They pull up, they give a little, a quick toot of the siren, and they're on their way. I guarantee it. But they do have the discretion to act on that or not, and that's very valuable. We don't stop everybody that's going 36 and a 35 and give them a $60 ticket. We don't do that. It's discretion. And I have very much the utmost confidence knowing the majority of the police officers in this town to be professional and to make that happen and explain to people and educate on the fly. This is why we can't do this. This is why you can't be here. And I get it. I don't want to give them another job, but it gives them the tools that they can pull up and say, this is what I have to do. This is my job. It backs them up. So for that, and I want to apologize to Marshall Murray. I wish I had reached out and I wish I had spoken to you, you know, prior to all this. It's been a whirlwind, and I don't think anybody's expected this. You know, Ward 1 councilor says, you know, it's above and beyond what you'd find possible. It's above and this whole thing is above and beyond what any of us feel like we would find possible. I never thought this in a million years when I ran for election that this would happen, but it is. And so let's deal with it and let's keep people safe. We're not asking for the Gestapo to send out and here's your, you know, show me your address and you show me this and here's a ticket for a 14-year-old. No, nobody wants that. Okay. But people aren't adhering to the rules. And yes, inherent, people that aren't going out and are doing the right thing, it's a slap in the face to them that there's still a segment of the population that feels like they can go and have a tailgate party when the weather gets nice down at Cashman Park, because why not? We're not at our house and we're, you know, it's outside, everything's okay. Well, that comes back to the education piece. So that's just some of the things that I feel, you know, I envision this thing. I don't envision this as becoming stop and frisk and, you know, violating people's civil rights and telling you can't go walk in the parks. You can. The courts are already closed. So the situation of, hey, you guys are playing tennis, are you related? No, it's not going to happen. It's get off the courts. The courts are closed now. It's not fun for anybody. Believe me, I know it. The longer we let this go on, the longer we're going to be locked in our houses.
All right, thank you, Councillor Lang. So at this point, Marshall Murray has his hand up. I would like to hear what he has to say. Marshall Murray.
Yes, thank you. I just want to speak on the ordinance itself. Really haven't talked about that. It does put the officers in a tough situation. It's open for interpretation from both sides, from the citizens as well as for the police officer. And I think it's unfair to ask them to enforce this as it stands now. It's, again, you know, you're talking about 10 people can gather. Well, then that means we got to figure out the distance between the 10 people. They're going to say they're 6 feet apart. They're going to cause a altercation with a police officer. We don't want to get into that. We're talking about children riding around. That's the parents' responsibility. They need to tell their kids they can't go out. They're going to go out. They're going to go by themselves. Or they're going to be with their parent. We know parents are allowing kids to hang out with friends, and we're seeing that. That's up to the parents to police the kids. We don't want our police officers harassing these kids. I mean, that's what you're asking us to do, and you are, and that's what you're asking us to do. Kids are out and they're riding around, and it's responsibility of the parents. So we need to continue to remind the parents that they need to take this seriously, as well as adults. But for we see, adults are out there for the most part taking this seriously. They're social distancing, and it's unfair to ask our officers to start asking your family member, who are you with? And that's going to happen if you want us to enforce this, which I think is unenforceable. Thank you.
Thank you, Marshall Murray. All right, so I'd like to go to Councillor Devlin next.
Thank you, Madam President. Yeah, I would say that, you know, whether it is meant to do the things that it sounds like several of the sponsors are saying, well, we wrote it this way, but it's okay if it turns out this way. I would suggest, rather than it was very interesting to hear the history of Judge Harlan. I'm sure that was extemporaneous, but importantly, if you read the ordinance, as Councillor Zede had suggested, that he had read the ordinance and knows what it says, it's very clear in A, first of all, A, bans activities on a variety of places, including rights of way, which would be streets and sidewalks. Remember that. B, A1 says for more than 10 people to gather for any purpose, whether indoors or out. That's one separate thing. So 10 people, more than 10 people can't gather, period. Okay. I think, again, I would observe and note for the record that many people are citing statutes and orders and health inspector, health director Monica Burrell's memorandum. Well, that's because those people had time to prepare for this and we're ready for this emergency order that came up today, and other of us do not have that. So I'm trying to keep it in memory here, but my memory of the governor's orders are he has banned gatherings of more than 10 people indoors. So that at least dovetails with something that's coming from the state, which has many more resources than we do as city councilors. But number two is where I think the sponsors didn't read clearly or understand clearly what they were writing, because this has nothing to do with 10 people. It clearly says one of the banned activities is for any person, that's in the singular, not 10, any person, to use any playground or play equipment or any athletic or sports equipment or field, court, or other area. Now I want you to go back to that right of way on the in the first paragraph of A. That's other area will include public ways, streets and sidewalks. I personally have seen some people that are on this call jogging together. So you can't do that anymore. And if you do, you're subject, unless you live together, but you're subject to the police stopping you, and not just the police, by the way, the police and the health director and the parking clerk. So, oh, and the animal control officer. I'm not sure what the animal control officer's training is, but I will say that I can guarantee you our parking enforcement people who do a wonderful job are not familiar. I think someone had said stop and frisk or Terry stops. That's somebody who has a law enforcement background. The idea of the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against unreasonable search and seizure, I do not think that our parking enforcement individuals have that. But what that establishes is you can't stop and question me as a government agency. And by the way, I did have time to do a little bit of research. Our health officials it was an interesting case out of San Francisco, so that should be relevant to some on this call. But that it did apply, the restrictions on reasonable search and seizure and the requirements for warrants and probable cause and reasonable suspicion does extend to health officials. Frankly, it extends to, without getting too detailed into the case law, but having practiced criminal law for at least 6 years in the Boston Municipal Court, the Dorchester Court, and the Charlestown District Court, when I first got out of law school, it does apply to government actors. So anybody that we're empowering in this will have to know what their abilities are, and they're not trained for it. So as the marshal's saying, what the marshal just said was, you're going to put my officers into very difficult conversations with people who are going to disagree with their interpretation of this novel ordinance. Well, not only that, we're going to put the health director and his designees and the parking enforcement people in charge of that as well. And they have even less training with conflict resolution than do the police, who their job is conflict resolution for the most part. So, but let me. So that's an important. So what 2 does? Someone says, all right, yes, the intention was to catch 2 children who are unrelated from throwing a baseball in a field. I personally agree with the Councilor for Ward 1. I don't want to live in a city where my police are telling those 2 kids to scram. I'm sorry. We have done a major thing. We were the first people in our area. Kudos to the mayor and her administration. We were a day ahead of others in our area for canceling school. We canceled the Friday. Everybody else started on Monday. And because she identified this as an issue, there was 3, that is a gathering of 3 buildings worth of 800 kids each in close proximity. Now that is something that is, that is justified because the means are gonna justify the ends. But again, any person, so you can't run on the, if you read this literally, you can't run on a right of way, you know, that's A2. So you can't run on the sidewalk. I'm sure that was not the intention, but I have neighbors, neighborhood children who go, I live by Fuller Field, and they go down to Fuller Field and then they come back up a lot very quickly. And it's two sisters. And I yelled out the window, why are you coming back and forth so much? They were like, we're waiting for the one person who's using the net on the lacrosse net to leave, so then we can go use it. So here are a 6th grader and an 8th grader who are practicing proper social distancing and while remaining healthy and doing the sport that they're interested in. So let me get to, you know, I got a little more specific than I wanted to, but for me, again, I think we've got two issues here. Are we willing to impose significant restrictions on people's individual rights? And if yes, to what end? Like, what justifies that? So then the next one is, do we have evidence or some sort of surety that this will achieve the goals of the ordinance to justify the significant infringement on the civil liberties? And, you know, the Ward 2 councilor regaled us with lots of legalese, and I am a lawyer, and but I am going to make it easy. One of my positives as a lawyer is I can put things in plain language. Do the ends justify the means? And you know, for me, the answer is no. And I'll go to the beginning, back to the emergency preamble. I disagree that we've established that there's an issue. It is a clever debater's trick to slide something in and say that it's assumed and then hope nobody, like, you know, jumps on it. But one of the things that we have, or notes it, one of the things we have in the second whereas is that notwithstanding such proclamation orders and any advisory issues on March 17, 2020 by Mayor Donna H. Holliday, closing to group activities. So again, let's be clear on what is happening right now in Newburyport and why this is going further. The restriction that we've had put in place, and again, I didn't really have a lot of time to get my hands on the physical order, but I'm going to read and take for granted what has been put in by the sponsors. We've closed our fields to group activities. This ordinance closes it to individual activities. Okay, so we're worried about social distancing and we're worried about large groups congregating together, but we're also going to take it that next step, as Councilor McCauley suggested, and we're going to say we're banning this for individuals as well. So, but I would disagree with the next part, that it's manifest. Manifest, that means it's obvious. That's a legal word for obvious. Manifest, fancy legal word. That such prohibited gatherings and group activities have continued at public properties under the jurisdictions of the city, including without limitation at public parks, playgrounds, and beaches. I don't feel that's accurate. And more importantly, I don't think that's been established either by the sponsors or by anybody else who has spoken in favor of this. Having people call you is called anecdotal evidence. And it could be the same 20 people calling everybody and emailing everyone. So not only is that anecdotal evidence, more accurately, the anecdotal evidence is what we've observed. This is second and third hand anecdotal evidence that hasn't been researched or investigated or captured. Maybe some of it's been captured on photo, but let's say it's not the same 20 people. Let's say it's the same, it's 1,000 people in the city. That's 5.5% of our population. So and we're not anywhere near 1,000 people having called all of us to make these complaints. So I think we have to take, not only should we not be, I argued this on the emergency preamble, but we have to take extra caution in these times of crisis to not make rash decisions based on anecdotal and second and third hand evidence. This also flies in the face, as I alluded to earlier, which I was discussing the emergency nature of this, but my observations, although anecdotal, at some point when they're done on a consistent basis, they move into empirical evidence. I have observed on a more systemic nature, at least, than some of these other anecdotal observations. I think one of the sponsors said that he's witnessed it in the last 2 days. Another sponsor confided to me that he hasn't been outside his house in 3 weeks, so he has not witnessed it himself either, although he has received emails and calls of complaint. But I think most importantly, for me, why this these ends doesn't justify the means is we have our two professionals, our two department heads, our health director. We have two people, two counselors on this call who have said, I don't agree with our health director. I think someone missed a point when they were saying none of us have a health background. You know, no one is arguing that this is a pandemic and this is a crisis. What we're arguing about is what are the proper actions to take to help alleviate that. And we have our health director offering very good observations for anybody who has been out. Again, I've run 18 of the last 21 days by myself, giving plenty of social distancing. I ran into the woods at one point to get social distancing, to make other people feel comfortable. And as I'm doing this, I've observed a lot of great behavior from our residents and citizens. So, but we have our health director who has made suggestions, and two people have discounted that. Two people who don't have health backgrounds. So yes, social distancing is important. That's not what we're arguing about right now. We're arguing about the length and depth and breadth of this ordinance. Now, I would say another thing. It is really bad policy to pass legislation and law that we hope is not fully enforced. That's why I voted no. I don't want any fines on this. I don't want to live in a community where our police are fining people for being outside. I have had many conversations, even before I was a city councilor, with the former marshal and with this marshal, where I have congratulated them on, we have a police force that is part of the fabric of the community. They take community policing to the next level. My kids are not afraid of the police like I was, you know, and suspicious of the police and worried that the police were going to try to pin something on us that we did. My kids are very they approach the police. Like one of my children was playing basketball with them last summer, and just feel very comfortable around the police. That helps policing, because then kids are more willing to go up to police officers and confide in them to avoid wrongdoing. We had this problem a couple of years ago when there were fights being scheduled, sort of like MMA fight, impromptu MMA fights all around our community. That was found out through kids approaching the police because they felt they could approach the police without the police overreacting. And what Marshall Murray is worried about is by having these confrontations with people over a poorly written ordinance that is very difficult to enforce, he's going to set back his relationship with their relationship with the community. They're going to have to enforce this. This is what I hear. People want enforcement. Be careful what you wish for. It's the same thing when I was on public safety and on TZAC. Everybody wants the speed limit enforced until they pull over your wife or husband or your kid and increase your insurance. Then they don't want it done anymore. So I would say one more thing too about this ordinance. By the way, Fourth Amendment, violations of the Fourth Amendment. we have liability as a city. We can be sued civilly as a city for violating people's civil liberties. So that's another drawback to this. Our job at these times is to remain calm and to exude calmness and discretion and to pass deliberatively legislation. I think we've got strike one, that we're doing this as an emergency order with about 7.5 hours of notice to some people, less to others. But by passing this in the breadth that it's in, and I don't want to get into the specifics, I will in a little bit, but there are problems with the statute. It goes too far, and I will hold those comments for later. Thank you.
All right, so I know Councillor Tantar, Vogel, and Lane have their hands up, but so does the health director, who's been waiting as long, if not longer. So I would like to hear from the health director on the comments that have been made so far.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief. I won't be as long, so I apologize for being long-winded before. A lot of the comments that I was going to say have been addressed, Councilman Devlin and by the Marshal. So again, I am not opposed to this regulation. However, councilmen need to know that social distances is key. Why do we keep 6 feet? Is because the way this virus travels in 2 ways, you're actually going to be coughed on or sneezed upon by droplets or touching someone who sneezes in their hand. Some of these activities that is under number 3, again, jog or run. You're not going to be sneezing on someone, or chances are very high that it won't happen. However, by restricting those, I think it's going to be detrimental just for public health in general, for people to get out. I do agree that physical contact and those type sports, basketball, no, you can't have that. So that's where we have to focus our this regulation on. Not the joggers, not people walking, and again, whether someone is a household member or not. I have heard the comments, and my final point, please, is that some councilmen said they've seen changes, others said that they haven't seen enough. I've seen 2 teenage kids coming out of Richdale. They didn't want to grab the handle. They used the sleeve of their coat to open a door. However, they didn't look like they were household members. So just walking down Pleasant Street together, is that an issue? They're not coughing or touching each other. So I think the people are getting it, but we do have to be repetitive, because just for someone to develop a habit, you have to repeat yourself 1,000 times, just like we do with our children. So again, I want to stress that it's not that I'm against the social distancing, but just some of these things here. And the one other comment that was made, that, and I will make this my final one, I'm sorry, that, well, we're not asking the police or the ACO or the health to actually enforce what's here and use your judgment. If it's written down, it has to be enforced that way. So then you're getting into a situation why you're not finding certain people and others you are. So I appreciate the time, and that is my final comment.
Thank you very much. Marshall Murray, I noticed your hand is up as well. Would you like to comment, please?
Yes, yeah, real quick, just one little comment to echo Frank. I think, we're talking about this as a tool for the police. And I think that to start, I think more signage out at the parks, like I said, or the ball fields, or wherever we're talking about. Cashman Park seems to be an issue. Put signage up the top of the street. That allows our officers and out, not this ordinance. This ordinance, like I said, it puts them in a bad position. We can start somewhere else to give them, hey, did you see the sign? You guys got to get out of here. That's it. Very simple. Thank you.
And just to wrap up the last one, Mr. Coogan, would you like to speak before I finish off with Tantar, Connell, and Lane? Are you muted or unmuted? You're unmuted.
You can hear me now?
Yep.
All right, not to be too repetitive, but Frank just told me I can. I mean, I think, you know, it's helpful for the administration and our enforcement officers to just to get, you know, real clarity on this, because on what the counselors are looking to accomplish. You know, there's the issue of discretion versus what the expectation of residents are versus what the message we're sending. I know, you know, there's you know, having kind of reviewed this for the last few hours, I mean, it seems like counselors want to send a message, but this comes with a lot of enforcement. And if, you know, sponsors of this ordinance don't, you know, want to provide lots of leeway and discretion, but, you know, the residents expect some enforcement, that's just puts, again, it puts our police in a tough position, particularly with the, you know, I think this is, you know, with a limited public process right now. You know, and I've also heard the term community policing. I mean, I think that this type of enforcement is the opposite of what our police department is trying to do with community policing. Understanding this is a severe situation, but, you know, there is long-lasting consequences of taking, you know, additional steps, and there is that fine line. You know, Frank just mentioned, you know, the public health benefits of outdoor recreation. We do have a lot of people that are being for lack of a better word, they're being asked to stay at home whenever possible. And, you know, as this progresses, and I don't think, you know, we're at least another month in this sort of new normalcy, providing that release valve is going to be super important for people. I mean, I believe, you know, having a quick conversation with the marshal earlier, I mean, he's seeing an uptick in calls that are related to mental illness, anxiety, and depression. So again, there's that fine line between, you know, the enforcement of people, you know, of social distancing versus the ability for people to feel comfortable going outside with not, you know, without that other sense of weight as far as what's going to happen. Do I have my ID? How do I prove that I'm a part of a household? So finally, the one thing I do want to say, and I think the marshal just said this, I heard, it sounds to me like counselors are looking, there's hot spots in particular. It sounds like it's more about parks and our formal public spaces rather than our rights of way. That seems to be the issue I'm hearing from counselors. I think that's something we could focus on. I know that you know, the patrol folks that are out in the police department, they are talking to people. I don't know how. When they see people, they do ask some questions, and we can ramp up the amount of patrolling in parks combined with signage. We can certainly add that signage. That seems to me in this conversation a big hole in our policy right now, and how we're getting the social distancing out. And that's certainly something we can do. And I just wanted to clarify that, you know, the ACO is. And our part-time person is going out and educating folks on the rail trail currently. So we are trying to do that. That's something that we recently did, I think a week or so ago. But I mean, that's what I'm hearing as far as this conversation, that if we can target some hot spots and get more of a police presence there with some signage, that may be a way to get the message across. Because it sounds to me like it's more of a message that we're trying to send, that this is a serious issue and we want everyone to take it seriously.
All right, thank you, Mr. Coogan. We have
Madam President, may I make a motion to amend?
Yes, Councillor Eigenman.
Yes, I make a motion to amend proposed section A2 in the second line, rather than reading or field, comma, court or other area, it would instead read or field or court, and strike or other area, so that it gets rid of that ambiguity. And after the word field, soccer field, adding, however, notwithstanding the foregoing, jogging and running does not constitute use of play equipment for purposes of this section.
Second.
All right, Mr. Jones, we have the amendment, and we have a second from Councillor Khan. So let me make sure I have this correct. For after field, court, strike, or other area, and can you please repeat the jog section?
Sure. So it'll read in full, for any person to use any playground or play equipment, comma, or any athletic field or sports equipment, comma, or field or court, comma, including without limitation a tennis court, basketball court, baseball field, or soccer field, comma, however, comma, notwithstanding the foregoing, comma, jogging or running does not constitute use of play equipment for purposes of this section. Clerk, was that clear?
Mr. Jones, you are muted right now.
Yeah, you're self-muted.
I am self-muted. I'm unself-muted. Thank you. We have a motion to amend on the floor, just as written. I'm sorry, as read by Councillor Eigenman, seconded by
Councillor Khan.
Councillor Khan. And that is the motion on the floor, Councillor Shan.
Right. Is there discussion on the amendment? There are 6 hands up right now. So for the sake of this, can you put your hands down and then tell me who wants to do this again? So it's Councillor Devlin and Councillor Vogel would like to talk to the amendment. Councillor Devlin.
I think Councillor Vogel's hand was up first.
Okay, Councillor Vogel.
Okay, thank you. So if I may, to the sponsor, yeah, in that section 2, I am curious, and I had this earlier on, but since we're here now, I'm going to go ahead and ask. So I am curious as to why we are designating any person when we're talking about the concern of having groups, but now we're talking about a single person. That's troublesome to me. I'm trying to understand why we go from regulating, and I'm comfortable with that, more than 10, regulating a person, and or why can't 2 people be on a soccer field, half a field length apart, kicking a ball around?
Madam President, may I respond under Rule 10B?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm only responding out of turn because there was a question directed to me.
Thank you.
Right.
My understanding is we wanted to close our athletic facilities. So for example, the basketball courts have had their standards taken down, the hoops are taken down so that nobody can use them, even a sole person. Now again, there's been debate on tonight's meeting whether that's the right policy. I understand. When I drafted this, I took it as an assumption that the existing policy would continue, but that you would add fines to enforce it. And so we don't want anybody playing sports on our equipment. That was my intention.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eigenman. Councillor, do you have any other comments, Councillor Vogel?
No, that answers that question. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Devlin.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to be clear to point out that the mayor's advisory and the signage at the fields has closed the fields to group activities because that's the social distancing we're talking about. But this ordinance, again, now goes from group activities and social distancing to we don't want any individuals outside at all. And look, I appreciate the sponsors, volunteering to amend it in this way. But again, I think we're getting into the grounds of why the marshal might think that this is somewhat unenforceable is I live by Fuller Field. I observe people using the fields in an appropriate way. We have had zero social contact with anybody. But we are following isolation as best and self-isolation as best we can. But I can see the field. I've gone down there with my child. You're going to shock a lot of people when they find out there are people running on our track all day long, Are they running? I will go back to what the health director said. Two people passing each other on a bike, as conscientious as we want to be, the likelihood from all, and he is our health director, but the likelihood of transmission of two people passing by themselves on a bike at 4.5 feet versus 6 feet, very, you'd have to cough perfectly into the person's mouth. So, and we have people observing, I saw it today, we have people observing social distancing on our track. They're getting exercise, they're strengthening their lungs. Children are out I happen to know who the kids are, but the police will have no way of knowing that. I know the kids are brothers, they're brother and sister, two brothers and a sister, as in my children. And they are down there by themselves. And when somebody else comes, they leave, or they use it for an appropriate amount of time, and then they leave and let somebody else have it. So my kids are 14, 12, and 8, and are practicing proper social distancing. So I still think, although I appreciate the amendment, it's you got to go further than jogging and running. You can use a soccer goal by yourself with very little chance of transmission. So, although I appreciate that, I would also say the language of saying that jogging and running is not included in the use of playground or play equipment. It's got to be jogging and running is on anything in this provision is excluded, or else it's just referring to the playground and play equipment.
I'd accept that as a friendly amendment if the second would.
I would.
Is that Councillor Lane seconding?
It is.
I had Councillor Khan as the second. Is it Councillor Lane? I'm sorry.
Yes, point of order.
No, Councillor Khan has to agree.
Councillor Khan was trying to unmute. So yes, I would accept that.
Okay, so let me see where it says, however, notwithstanding the foregoing, jogging and running does what will we say at this point? Right now it says does not constitute use of play equipment for this section.
No, it does not constitute a violation of this section.
Yeah, that's right. Does not constitute violation of this section.
Got it. So the amendment now stands changed such that it says does not constitute violation of this section. The forestated field or court and striking or other areas still stands.
Yeah.
All right, so do we want to, Councillor Lane, do you have a comment on the amendment?
I don't at this time. I'll take my hand down.
All right, Councillor Zeid or Vogel, do you?
I do have a comment on the amendment. I think I think Councillor Devlin said this, but it bears emphasis, which is that, this assumption that there was some already agreed upon policy and that this is simply reinforcing that and adding enforcement to it simply doesn't.
A point of order, is that on the amendment?
It is, because now you're trying to fine tune exactly what the level of restriction is on the fly. And so in my opinion, yes, it's germane to the discussion on the amendment. And if the idea is to quash councillors from speaking, I'll withhold my comment until the appropriate time, Madam President.
I resent that comment. I made a motion that was in order.
All right.
I yield to the president.
Mr. Jones?
No. Councillor Shan, before this devolves any further, I might suggest that anyone speak simply to the amendment. If not, we'll go to a roll call vote on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So we have two councillors holding their hands up. We have Councillor Wallace and Councillor Vogel. Councillor Wallace, specific to the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Just a question, clarification. What exactly is said in the mayor's order? From my understanding is that fields are closed. I do not want to contradict that order. The idea is to put teeth to what is already there. Does someone have the answer to that? Thank you.
So if it's not a counselor, is Matt Coogan still on?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Can you answer Councillor Wallace's question specifically?
I'm gonna look up the language just so I have it.
Okay.
I have it handy here if it pleases the president.
All right, Mr. Coogan will let Councillor Zede read it. Councillor Zede.
I'm simply going to read from it so there's no questions. Public playgrounds and athletic fields are closed to limit COVID-19 dated March 17th, 2020. This is a difficult situation as we would like residents to enjoy physical activity with proper social distancing. However, we cannot allow group gatherings or activities of any size on public fields or basketball courts and the skate park. Coronavirus may also survive on surfaces for a long period of time and contaminate playground equipment. The next sentence is the last one I'll read. Athletic fields will be closed to group gatherings, activities, and team practices. The Clipper City Rail Trail and passive areas of parks will be open, for walking and exercising. There are several other paragraphs, but that seems to be the ones that are being asked about.
Thank you, Councillor Zede. Does that answer your question, Councillor Wallace?
Yes, I think it's just the first sentence is misleading when they say they're closed, but then they elaborate. But if it's the sense of the council that it still allows group or non-group activities, then that's fine.
A point of order. What I have in front of me, which is on the city webpage, the third paragraph says athletic fields will be closed, period. It does not say athletic fields will be closed for group activities.
So
that's on the city webpage.
Mr. Coogan, can you speak to that?
There's been a lot of information we've put out over the last couple of days. As quickly as possible, I would refer to the March 17th, 2020. The title is Playground. That's what the Ward 1 councilor read. It's titled Public Playgrounds and Athletic Fields are closed to limit COVID-19, March 17th, 2020.
Okay.
So
go right ahead.
May I? Yes. So is it the understanding then that they are closed? Maybe that's a question for other counselors. I mean, to me, it sounds like they are closed to everything, and I would want to stay consistent with that. Okay, thank you.
All right, so in order of so Councillor Wallace, have your questions been answered?
Yes, thank you.
Well, if I may.
One moment, Councillor Devlin. Councillor Vogel had his hand up first, and then I'm
answer that question.
I have the same question. I'm not comfortable at all with that language as the counselor from Ward 1 read. It's contradictory, and I don't think that referring to it back to a date is any help at all. I mean, I want to know that the website says one thing, the language as Councillor Zede read says another. Fields are either open or they're closed. They're either open to 10 people or less, or they're closed. It doesn't make any sense to me. And that's the trouble I have with number 2 here and the subsequent amendment.
Madam President, I can't raise my hand, but I'd like to speak to that when I get a turn.
Thank you.
So the next person to speak was going to be Councillor Zede, but Councillor Zede, would you like Councillor Eigenman to take your spot to answer?
All I would like to use my time for is to say that what I am reading is from the city website. It's the one that Matt Coogan just referred to. The other one looks like an update, but this is the one I'm referring to, and just to be clear on what I read from. That's all.
Thank you very much, Councillor Zede. Councillor Eigenman?
Wait, how is Councillor getting in front of me? My hand is up before he was.
I'm sorry, Councillor Devlin. I believe I thought your question was the same as Councillor Vogel's. What
I
is?
don't have a question. I have that's the original order is on the way. I'm just going to repeat what Councillor Zeid said. The original order is on March 17th, 2020, and it says athletic fields will be closed to group gatherings, activities, and team practices. There's a reminder later on the website, a little bit higher up the list of documents, that says the language that Councillor Tantar was reading. But if you go to our city parks, there are signs. Has anybody been to any of our city parks before they comment on this? There are signs there that say it is closed to group gatherings, activities, and team practices. That is the public perception of this.
Okay. Is there a question you have, Councillor Devlin?
No.
Okay. All right, Councillor Eigenman.
Yes, I just want to, I'm also going from the March 17 notice, which by the way was not issued as an order. It's a notice, so let's be fair. It's just a notice. It's a policy. But it says, first, fields are closed in the bold headline. Then it says in the subheadline, public playgrounds and athletic fields are closed with no qualification. What I think people were not listening carefully enough to was when Councillor from Ward 1 was speaking. It says, however, comma, we cannot allow group gatherings or activities of any size. Any size. And then later on, the next next paragraph down, athletic fields will be closed to group gatherings, comma, activities, comma, and team practices. Activities is not qualified by either the word group or team, if you want to go by that. But again, it doesn't, yes, I'm owning it. In the ordinance, we're banning it. We're banning use of athletic fields except for passive recreation, which is in the advisory.
So if I understood you correctly, you're saying that the ordinance that's at hand does not contradict what's currently on the city website.
I don't read it in the English language contradicting it, one, but two, even if it did, yeah, okay, so maybe it is. I don't think it is.
All right. So in order of the hands I've seen, Councillor Lane, Councillor Wallace, and Councillor Devlin.
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, that's kind of the resounding theme is, why can't we let people use fields? Why can't we let two people use a tennis court? Why can't we? This is a directive that's already in place. We're arguing about something that's already in place. That's all I wanted to point out.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Councillor Devlin.
Yeah, I disagree with the fact that it's already in place. The language in that order is not dispositive. It's misleading to say that is what's in place. If you go to the fields themselves, the fields say closed to group activities and athletic team practices. So I would say that regardless of what the intention was, that's not what's been happening in practice, and people are going to be surprised when you say little Jimmy or little Jane can't go down and use the soccer net by him or herself or with their lawful parent. I would also say that whether that is the intention or not, this is the time for us to debate whether that is the appropriate exercise. I have heard probably 150 times today that social distancing is what's going to help us get through this pandemic, and I do not understand how one person on an athletic field. I didn't reply when I heard that some of the basketball hoops were taken down. By the way, not all of our basketball hoops were taken down. Just some of the basketball hoops were taken down. So there are other areas of the city where there are still basketball hoops. I would want to make a comment about that as well. Think about the fairness of taking down. Who are we hurting when we take down basketball hoops? You're not hurting me and my children, because I have a lot and a half. I have a big basketball court and a paved driveway, and I'm very lucky that I can go out and shoot baskets with my children. But the Kelleher Circle or the housing up behind the Dunkin' Donuts, Woodman Way, and even further up behind that, or all the housing that's in and around the Port Plaza, they don't have resort to their own basketball court. So even individually by themselves with a parent or guardian, they can't go shoot around at a basket by themselves and observe social distancing. I look at, no matter how good our high school coach thinks our team is, there are very few kids in this area in this city who are dunking a basketball or even touching a rim where they have any chance of getting any virus on the rim. So you know, I just think it's going too far to say that a one person or people in the same family or small groups can't still go out and use the athletic facilities. And that's, I do not think either that wasn't the intention of the order, but it certainly isn't what the practical effect of that order has been.
All right, thank you, Councillor Devlin. So we have Councillor Lane, Zeed, and Wallace. And I would like to make one comment. The reason they were taken down at Cashman and Kent is because there was body-on-body contact and some pretty good pickup games. And that is what we are trying to avoid. So with that being said, we have, I'm sorry, Matt Coogan does have his hand up. Let's see what Matt Coogan has. Mr. Coogan?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I guess to clarify from the administration's perspective, I think we would benefit if this language is from March 17th. I think we would all benefit for some clearer language. If the means of doing that is through this order, I think it would suit everybody if we made this a little bit clearer. I think that when we made this order, we were anticipating ball fields and pickup games where there was a lot of body contact. But I think that making it clearer and how it's written right now, I don't think we would be opposed to that administration. It would be helpful to get some clarity with the help of the council.
Thank you, Mr. Coogan. All right, so back to the order in the hands. Councillor Lane.
Sure. I just want to say, look, nobody wants this right now. So I feel the pain too. I don't want to be, to have to tell people or to even like try and suggest to tell people what to do with their lives. We're all upset and upside down in our lives. That my apologies to everybody if we can't use a basketball court for a couple weeks to save maybe older folks who don't have a chance, that those folks would have a chance. So I think that you have to look deep at this, and it's not about this is forever, this is what we want or what we don't want or what I don't want or what I don't want for my family. This is what is going to keep people safe. And I don't necessarily think that we've all been constructive on this to this point. And I'd ask that we stick to making this work for everybody and making it a little bit more comfortable for those who are uncomfortable. So as far as the basketball courts, sure, take down all the hoops. Fine. Half the NBA has this thing. So don't tell me you can't be spread playing basketball. Okay? So all this is to keep more people safe. And if all of us collectively, all 42 people on this call right now, and that will listen to this, can't agree to come to some terms to keep people a little bit more safe. And I'm not trying to bring us back 20 years. I'm not trying to erase any community policing. I'm not trying to overstep anybody's bounds. Let's just take a minute and think about how we can put this thing together. So far, so good. We're changing it and we're all contributing and we're all being constructive. I think we should just keep in that frame and just move forward here.
All right, thank you, Councillor Lane. Councillor Zeed, and then Councillor Wallace.
I want to move the question on the amendment, Madam President.
Second.
Second.
All right.
You take a vote, Councillor Shan, on moving the question.
Yes.
How many, we need a 2/3 or a majority?
Majority, I believe. I don't have it. I don't have my sheet. I'm at home in front of me. Is move the question 2/3 or majority? I don't remember off the top of my head. It could be 2/3.
Hold on, let me check.
Somehow, something tells me we're going to get it anyways.
It's
Oh,
2/3.
fair enough.
Yeah, it's 2/3. Okay. So,
Two-thirds.
Councillor Shan, on move the question. Shall I do a roll?
Yes, please. And can we please let folks know what they're voting on?
Okay, so simply, what they're actually not voting on the amendment. They're voting on moving the question to get to the amendment.
Sorry.
Okay. Councillor Wallace. Councillor Wallace.
I'm going to say no because I just had a question, a quick question. Go ahead.
Okay, Councillor Zede.
Yes.
Councillor Devlin.
Yes.
Councillor Khan.
Yes.
Councillor Lane.
Yes.
Councillor McCauley.
Yes.
Councillor Connell.
Yes.
Councillor Shan.
Yes.
Councillor Tantar.
Yes.
Councillor Vogel.
No.
Councillor Agaman.
Yes.
Okay, so the question is moved, Councillor Shan, which means we should go immediately to a roll call vote of the motion to amend A2. And again, for those wondering, it is the addition of the word or, it's striking or other area, and now it is simply, however, notwithstanding the foregoing, jogging and running do not constitute violations of this section. Shall I go to a roll call?
Yes, please.
Okay, Councillor Wallace.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Zede.
Yes.
Councillor Devlin.
No.
Councillor Khan.
Yes.
Councillor Lane.
Yes.
Councillor McCauley.
Yes.
Councillor Connell.
Yes.
Councillor Shan.
Yes.
Councillor Tantar.
Yes.
Councillor Vogel.
Yes.
Councillor Agaman.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so the motion to approve is on the floor with the two amendments as previously voted.
I see further discussion with 4 hands popping up. Councillor Wallace, Councillor Devlin, Councillor Tantar, Councillor Zede, and Councillor Connell.
Point of order
And
point of order. The I was next to speak
Okay.
before the amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were taking your hand down.
No, I took my hand down so I wouldn't be recognized to speak on the amendment.
Okay.
And I apologize. I'm raising my hand.
Okay. So first, Councillor Tantar. Then, in the same order that I just mentioned, it was Councillor, I believe, Devlin, Zede, then Connell.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I am not a constitutional lawyer, and I hope no one criticized me for daring to speak about the law, but I'm going to give some quick answers to simple questions. First of all, do I want to impose on individual rights? My answer is yes, and I'll explain why. Secondly, to what end? To achieve and protect public safety. Those are the quick answers. On constitutional law, I'm going to start out by noting John Stuart Mill, the great 19th century economist, utilitarian philosopher, and author of On Liberty. All right, and he said, one's liberty, one's freedom, right, extends to the point where it begins to impinge on another person. At that point, you're in a different world, right? You're in a different world, and that frames what we're talking about here. I really very much appreciated the council president sending me a copy of Jacobson versus Commonwealth of Massachusetts, in which Justin Howland did opine on this. I'm going to quote him, but the liberty, this is a quote, but in that opinion, the liberty secured by the Constitution of the United States to every person within its jurisdiction does not import an absolute right in each person to be at all times and in all circumstances wholly freed from restraint. There are manifold restraints to which every person is necessarily subject for the common good. On any other basis, organized society could not exist with safety to its members. Goes on to further say, upon the principle of self-defense of paramount necessity, a community has the right to protect itself against an epidemic of disease which threatens the safety of its members. He was talking about smallpox in 1904. So that frames for me the question, and I think that this is going to be a judgment that each of us has to make on how we vote. All right, as to whether or not these particular circumstances result in our concluding that we have to impinge on individual rights, and we can fall all over the place on. All right, I just want to, again, I'm not a public health expert, but I do want to indicate, where I'm coming from, and I do, tend to look at numbers when I deal with these things, and particularly have spent a lot of time, as many have, examining the Italian experience. So, just a note: we are 28 days since the first case in Essex County. 28 days. At 28 days in Italy, they had 35,713 cases. Right? It happens that that's when they shut down. And in Italy, when they shut down. One person in a household could leave at a time, and that person has to self-report. They have to carry a piece of paper with them indicating why they are out on the street. Right? That was approximately 20 days ago when they shut down. So in that time, all right, their cases have increased in Italy from 35,713 to 132,547, 3.71 times greater. So just to give you an idea, we have 25 cases in Newburyport right now. 3 weeks from now, if we follow the Italian example, all right, we would have 93 cases, right? I'd suggest to you that 93 cases in Newburyport would overwhelm, all right, the local hospital. Even if you say 10% of those need to be hospitalized, it would cause a problem, all right? So that's where I'm coming from, all right? We also note, all right, that there are other countries who have been used relatively, the term is harsh, all right, methods to address it. Mostly in Asia. South Korea is one, Hong Kong is another, Singapore is another, and what anyone who can read the press reads is that those countries have been very successful, all right, in flattening their curves and damping down the experience with coronavirus. So with that as a background, that's what I bring to this, all right? I'm just telling you that because that informs why I sponsored this and why I think it is critical for us to undertake it. Just a couple other comments. I had people today ask me to take tennis out from this so that people could play tennis, and I understand that. I would note that the United States Tennis Association says, this is a quote, the USTA asks that as tennis players, we need to be patient in our return to the courts and consider how our decisions will not only affect ourselves, but how our decisions can impact our broader communities. In the meantime, we encourage everyone to stay active and healthy with at-home exercise and creative tennis at home variations. On jogging, I think whereas two people, the health director was referring to two people perhaps passing each other and running in opposite directions. My son has been training for an ultra marathon. His club has said, look, you got to stop being out there for two reasons. One, you shouldn't be running side by side with someone, especially when you're running 25 miles, right, in your training. And secondly, if you hurt yourself, you're going to end up in the hospital. And the last thing you need to do right now is to stress the healthcare system. So he's cut back tremendously, and actually everyone in the club has cut back tremendously in in their jogging. And you don't jog, standing next to each other. So finally, I just want to note, just so it's clear, regardless of how anyone votes in this, I am not going to accuse you of having blood on your hands. I would not do that. And I also would like to apologize to the health director and to the marshal in that we did not have time to perhaps appropriately discuss this with you. We threw it out there because we thought, those of us who were sponsors thought we were in an emergency situation, and we wanted to have this discussion and let the council make a decision on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chancellor. So everyone knows the list is Councillor Devlin, Councillor Zede, Councillor Connell, Councillor Igerman, then Councillor Vogel. Councillor Devlin? Need to unmute yourself, Joe.
I was playing around with that so much that I left myself muted. I'm sorry. My point in raising my hand was not to speak to the prior speaker's statements, but I will say a couple people have cited some case law, and again, a sign of the times, I'm sure, because we are practicing social distancing. I can't answer any of the case law because I haven't seen any of it. I don't have any in my email. I don't have an email. But I would say the law, it's safe to say the law is a tricky thing. It's always dancing and kind of moving with the times and the facts and the people doing the arguing and the people doing the deciding. So for every argument on one side, there's a counter argument on the other side. We are actually having that argument right now. This is where the argument, the two sides of the argument is justification and the infringement of individual rights. And again, the USTA might be saying something about tennis, but two members of the same household playing tennis together is not contributing to the COVID-19 pandemic. I actually wanted to make a motion to amend, and the amendment would be to delete A2 in its entirety, to delete animal control officers and parking enforcement officers from section C, and to delete everything in section C after are expressly authorized to enforce the provisions of this order, period, basically taking away all of the fines and the use of revenues.
So can we take that one at a time, Counselor? Your first amendment is to strike section A2 altogether?
Correct, as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
I would suggest that we for ease of discussion as we're approaching 3 hours on this, that we can go through them individually, but for clarity's sake. But I would like to have it as one motion.
Okay.
For
clarity's sake.
We're removing A2.
Correct. And that was
in C.
Seconded by Councillor Zede.
Well, I would just like the second to come at the end of this. We're removing A2. We're removing C. From C, we're removing the parking clerk in the first line and parking enforcement officers in the second line. I'm sorry, animal control officers in the second line and parking enforcement officers in the third line. And then in that same, on the fourth line, after order, there will be a period, and then everything else will be deleted down to the second C, which is effective date, which is an error.
That should be a D. Second all.
So, Councilor Shan, let me see if I've got it.
Yep.
So the motion is to strike A2 in its entirety. Following that, to subsection C, striking parking clerk and then animal control officers and parking enforcement officers. And then after the word order, which is in the fourth line, beginning with by penalizing violators, all the way to the remainder of subsection C, and then the following section C, effective date. Am I correct?
Yeah, you can even throw in an amendment to change that to D.
D, it's a Scribner's error.
That would be, wouldn't it?
Mhm.
So we're really striking those provisions of C and then D, re-lettered, leaving E, severability.
We can leave effective date as well, actually. I think the effective date was supposed to be D.
So I'm sorry. So you're leaving D. You're leaving effective date. So it's striking C in the first paragraph, and then 1, 2, and 3, and then you're leaving effective date. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, got you. So I think I've got it, Councillor Shan.
Can you repeat it for the rest of the councilors, please?
Okay. So this is a motion by Councillor Devlin to strike A2 in its entirety, to modify AC as follows, which is entitled Violations and Penalties. The first stricken clause is the parking clerk, followed by the next stricken clause is animal control officers and parking enforcement officers. And then following that, after the word order on the 4th line, the rest of section C, meaning 1, 2, and 3, all stricken.
If I may, Madam President, for the reasons for my motion.
Yes, Councilor.
So first, I think AC is the most, A2 is the most problematic for in listening to the discussion and from the people that I have heard from. I would submit that most residents don't want any person to be banned from using the fields and athletic fields and like places. They wanted to with what the order says now, it's banned to group activities with the advisory from the mayor. So then on C, AC, I'm just not comfortable with having the parking clerk, the parking enforcement officer, the animal control officers. Something I do know a lot about is the 4th Amendment, and that's problematic for people who aren't trained in that, and also aren't trained in the conflict resolution that they're going to get from doing this. And then getting rid of the fines, for me, what I heard is people want to put teeth and give the marshal the ability and the police department the ability to do something if necessary to disperse larger groups. And by passing this, we don't need fines to give them teeth. They have the authority to say, it's like the marshal said, the authority to say, you need to leave now. Now he can say, before he said, I wanted to say there's a sign here that says get off. Frankly, they could from a trespassing perspective. But what they're allowed to do with this is very clear. You can't have large gatherings on here. So if there is, one of the things I heard was a complaint about a 5-on-5 body against body basketball. Well, this will give them the enforcement powers to say you can't do that here. There's the discussion about tailgating in the back of a couple of trucks at Cashman. We're not allowed to have alcohol. I hope they weren't tailgating with alcohol. That itself is something that people can be removed for, and cited for. So this gives them ability there's some ordinance that we've passed that gives the ability for people to be able to, for the appropriate people to disperse larger crowds. And that sounds like what people are looking for. I think we get too far in there. I'll borrow the Ward 5 counselor. I don't think we're taking a half step too far. I think we're taking about 2 or 3 steps too far. Thank you.
All right, so the remaining folks that are on here, Zeed, Connell, Eigerman, and Lane. Do you have comments to the amendment?
Yes, thank you. I support the amendments. I think that the councilor is trying to offer something of a compromise. I was thinking, actually, he sort of beat me to it. I was going to propose something similar, but I just want to be very clear that why I support the amendment and actually why I would suggest one other piece. You know, A2, we very, very narrowly or almost banned people, a single person, from walking down the sidewalk by the language. And, you know, that amendment that was previously passed was corrected. But I'm strongly in agreement that, you know, anybody can cite any cases they want, but a single person, a single child, a single individual kicking a soccer ball at a city field doesn't pose any risk. It's one person. And the whole point of this has been beat up several times now, is social distancing. So A2 in its entirety is not logical. And I think that if this is the process by which we are clarifying an unclear advisory and trying to make it more formal, then this is the opportunity to do so. So I strongly support striking A2 because I don't think it makes sense to support something that would inhibit a single person by themselves from doing something alone. I don't see how that's a big enough risk vector at all to justify under any court case curtailing that one person's ability to move around. So that's A2. The other piece that I want to suggest, and I will offer it as an amendment to the amendment if it's accepted by a friendly, is that A3 is also a problem. I mean, I'm going to tell you, this is also deeply troublesome for me, which is no person can stand, sit, walk, jog, or run. This means that a caregiver cannot walk a child around a neighborhood. So you have somebody who watches kids. You know, there are still people out there that work, and the caregiver may need to take the children out for a walk. That's a real thing. It's not a crazy situation. It's not, and is there some risk? They don't live in the same household. Yes, I mean, admittedly, anything is a risk at this point, but I don't think that makes, I don't think that stands to muster and makes any sense. I also don't think that, you know, if two people choose to sit next to each other on a park bench, that rises to the level of all these grandiose cases. So I am in support of the amendment. I'm less religious about, you know, the parking clerk and so forth, although I think it makes sense. But I want to offer if A3 could be stricken as well as a friendly, and that basically leaves us with what we wanted from the start, which is groups of people congregating, and so that's a friendly if it's accepted as such by the sponsor of the amendment.
Is there a second for the proposed amendment to the amendment?
I think, Councilor Shan, it would be up to Councilor Devlin at this point to accept it, since the second has proposed it.
Okay, sorry.
I'll accept it. I was trying to keep it clear with, I have a problem with that too. So it might have been something that I would have done afterwards, but I'll accept it for purposes of discussion so that we can.
So, Councilor Shan, at the risk of repetition, the motion now is to amend, which would be deleting A2, deleting A3, and the aforementioned changes to subsection C.
Got it. All right, so so if I understand correctly, we still have Councilor Connell, Eigerman. Councilor Connell, do you want to speak to this?
Somewhat reluctantly, but yes. I oppose the amendment. I think particularly now that item 3 has been thrown into the mix, I agreed with the sponsors' amendments regarding violations and penalties in section C about the parking enforcement officers and ACO. I do want to come back, however, and say that I am very reluctant to support an amendment that would strike section A2. This section refers essentially to ball sports. Ball sports, by their nature, are based on sharing with someone else some part of the game, and the temptation to play a game with someone else, or even to leave, as remote as this possibility may be, a residue of virus particles or their residue on the rim, on a backboard, on the court from a ball that was traveling from hand to hand, even if it was just one person followed by another person later. As remote as it is, I think the idea of eliminating all ball sports, to make that clear to everyone, was a good thing. Balls are vectors. They may carry a particle from one place to another and leave it there. And on that basis, I don't see the wisdom of taking Section 2 out. And I will reflect a little bit on past experience. There are a couple of people on this call who might recall the tail end of the polio epidemic. I'm one of them. And parents were terrified because they saw the kids, and I saw the kids, clattering down the hall at school with their legs in these metal braces with crutches. I remember a kid by the name of Prescott, and I don't remember if it was Mrs. Egan's first grade or Mrs. Hoffman's second grade class, who left with polio, left school, and we heard later that he had been placed in an iron lung, which was a way to keep him breathing. And he never returned to school. But parents were rightfully frightened at that time. And one of the things that we were prohibited from doing was swimming in public pools, because there was fear that a pool, the water in a pool, might allow the transmission of that disease to another kid. Even going to Lake Ronkonkoma, which we looked forward to doing in the New York City area, that was out in Long Island. We couldn't swim in the lake, in the public swimming area that was supervised by guards, because again, parents were afraid to let their kids go in the water. That turned out to be unfounded, but that was the kind of fear. And yeah, so I think sometimes we do things, or we think of things unrealistically, or we think of the most remote possibility of an exposure taking place, and you know, these ball games, basketball, tennis, soccer, etc., baseball certainly run those risks, however remote they are, because our minds just, you know, we just struggle with the possibility of something ending up in a tragedy and making someone sick. And we want to be responsible for our own behavior, but also responsible in a more collective sense. So I'm going to vote against this proposal. Were it limited to the violations and penalties section, I certainly could support it, but not in its present form.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Connell. Councillor Eigenman.
Thank you. Long ago, I can't remember when, but Councillor from Ward 1, one of the objections was that that we should follow precedent, and that some councillors, he understood, had said that there is no precedent for this situation. I just want to clarify that's not what I'm saying. There is precedent. You just heard about polio, there's smallpox, there's tuberculosis. That's what I'm resting on, and I respectfully disagree with my colleagues that believe that it invokes, it implicates a search and seizure to fine people for not observing the social distancing rules. Again, there's no search, there's no seizure. It's just a ticket. And there is, you know, just similarly, as I said also earlier tonight, you can analogize to other Chapter 40, Section 21D civil infraction situations we have where tickets are given. Yes, of course, search and seizure applies to every officer of the city, but there has to be a search and seizure for it to apply. That's my argument. You know, fine. I have a right to my opinion, I guess. Another question was, is this the thin edge of the wedge? Is this, you know, our curfews next and so on? Where does it end? You know, the legislature has the right to pick and choose what measures to take. And, you know, yeah, that's the way I understand it. We don't have to cover everything all at once. Curfews are not before us. I don't know if someone's going to come in with curfews. I don't know. Also, there was a question, you know, why should we do something different than Governor Baker is doing? It's because we're a separate polity. We don't have to just sit around and wait for the governor. As I also said a while ago, our Board of Health could have done this in their absence. Our legislature can do it. And there's examples already of disagreements. The mayor of Boston does not agree with Governor Baker that construction should continue. And so he's issued a local order that contradicts the state order. I mean, at bottom here, and it's not true that, at least I'm not brushing off, I'm addressing head on some of the arguments made, including by the marshal, that it doesn't seem worth it to the marshal to imperil the relationship between his department and teenagers or other members of the public to enforce social distancing. And so I oppose the motion because I do think, what I'm saying is I do think social distancing works. And if the motion were to pass, the amendment, all that would be left would be a ban on 10 people or more. And I don't think that's enough. Again, we have the right as a legislature to disagree with the city marshal that's important. And if we don't, you know, and again, we're going to act as a body on this. I fully recognize and respect the opinion of dissenting counselors that they don't think, you know, say one child playing in a field is worth preventing. Again, I don't agree. I think there's both an ease of enforcement and a cautionary principle. The other point I'll make, and again, I won't quote any case law, I've already provided it, but all that the legislature has to do is be rational in what it does, unless we're violating some obvious fundamental right. And I already addressed that. I don't think we are. We're not a court. We don't weigh things based on evidence, and we don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt or preponderance or any of that stuff, you know, that social distancing works. And that's why I sent the Jacobson case, and I apologize if counselors didn't receive it. I checked, everyone was copied. Of course, counselors have multiple email accounts, and I apologize for that. That was covered in the case. You know, they also, in the case, because it's an old principle, you know, court is not going to assume that things will be enforced in an absurd manner. So this sort of, you know, strict construction argument was made there too about the vaccination. The convict, because he had been convicted of not getting his vaccine, argued that, you know, there should be an exception for extraordinary cases, and it wasn't explicitly stated in the law, and so therefore it was invalid. And again, they reviewed that and they rejected that. So, you know, it's not about the 10 people who choose to be around each other. It's not about kids who elect to be around each other or adults. If it were just about their infecting one another, then probably there wouldn't be a governmental interest. But the science at the time of the smallpox epidemic 120 years ago and now, as I understand it, again, it only has to be a rational basis. It doesn't have to be proven, you know, by doctors at a trial, is that there's a danger to innocent parties that don't elect to exercise together or be within 6 feet, that there's a knock-on effect and that we're putting at risk other people. And it's stated in the whereas clauses. You know, that's why I was careful to give the justification of why it was an emergency. You know, we do have limited hospital facilities, so that's a problem. I would say more, you know, but I'll save it for good of the order. You know, some of the statements that were made, I want to address that in good of the order. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eigenman. All right, Councillor Lane. Councillor Lane, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Got it. Okay. I'm not in favor of that. I do believe we need to spell out. I could totally respect and understand, and I'm not afraid to take away the penalties in this as long as it's getting it's noticed and it's getting moved along to where it spells out. Even if it was a warning, that's fine. As the very crux of it is, I want to have people take notice of what's going on and be more aware. I think this conversation right here in and of itself is going to get people to talk about it and is going to get people to pay attention and is a tool for education. I think you need to leave in there, as long as if what I'm understanding is that all of the fields are closed and they're closed, then we can leave a paragraph in there stating so. And I do think you need to keep section 3 as well. So that's just my opinion on the whole thing. So, I do appreciate the compromise and trying to find something. And I think there is potentially a way to compromise both in 2 and 3 to combine them with some language around, yes, the fields are closed. We all know that. That's by order of the city, and includes the 6 feet social distancing rule as well. So I would just like to throw that back out there.
All right, Councillor Vogel.
Wow. All right. So what I hear is that, or what it appears to be, is that there's lack of clarity as to exactly what the administration and the Parks Department or whatever it might be is imposing on our open spaces. So that seems to need to be cleared up somewhere along the line. I find it hard to understand why a single person out on a ball field is an issue. I have a hard time understanding what we're going to do when a babysitter is walking an unrelated child on the rail trail. I understand completely that as a government, we can, sorry to say, impose on people's rights for the good of all. That makes complete and total sense. We have a for lack of any other word, a bag of poop right here. We're all over the place. We have conflicting information. We don't have clarity. We all understand what we're trying to do. And in some places, we're reaching too far. Some we're not reaching far enough. We're not in concert with what's already out there. And it's 5 minutes to 11. I am completely and totally at a loss as to what direction to take. I am fully in concert with the idea of doing something, and I applaud the sponsors for this effort. But it's just not. It just doesn't feel like it's in sync. And I know the public would like a lot of clarity, and I don't think that we're providing clarity. And I think that if clarity were provided, it would give the marshal, it would give the health department, it would give all entities the opportunity to do the educational piece that we really all believe needs to be done. How I end this conversation, I have no idea. I'm having a hard time keeping my eyes open. We are all over the place, and I'm not sure that I'm not sure what to do. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Vogel. And I will refer to Clerk Jones and maybe to the actual President Eigerman. We mentioned earlier the motion to postpone. Is that something that's...
Yeah, I'll just make the motion. I move to postpone this matter, matter 4, for 48 hours to commence at 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday, April 8th.
Second. A point of order.
Yes, Councillor Connell.
Yeah, I'd ask a ruling of the clerk. Do we have to dispose of the amendment before us before taking a motion to postpone or a motion to continue to a future date? I hear paper rustling.
Wake up, Richard.
Richard,
He fell asleep.
he actually went off the, he actually,
It's not even on the call.
yeah,
Madam President, if
No,
if I
he's
may,
there.
it's 10:58. We probably need even just to get through this, we probably need a motion to continue past 11 o'clock.
So move.
all right. All right, do we want to take a roll call vote, or we can just say, all those who oppose it, say, if I don't hear anybody say anything, we're in approval. We're in agreement. All right. So with no one saying anything, then we are okay to go past 11. So the motion on the floor was a motion, was a question to Clerk Jones. Richard, are you on the call again?
How appropriate. He's not there.
He's there.
He is going in and out.
Like me.
There he is again. Richard? Richard, maybe you can call in?
Madam President, may I say something as a point of order?
Certainly.
I have the Roberts Rules cheat sheet that I believe the clerk uses, and postponing does need a second. It is debatable, it is amendable, and it's a majority vote required to postpone. I believe we have a local rule, but that applies to postpone indefinitely. Perhaps the Ward 2 Councillor correct me if I have that aspect incorrect.
Councilor Eigenman, you're muted.
No, I read it the same way. I mean, you know, for what it's worth, you're the president, so you have to decide. But my understanding is it just takes a majority vote, and we can debate whether to postpone.
Well, point of order.
One second.
Again, the question was, can we take that?
1 second, please. Is Richard on? I thought I heard him come back. The question is whether the motion, the amendment on the floor right now needs to be voted on prior to us continuing, postponing till Wednesday. Just hoping to get an answer from Richard on that one.
Okay, well, again, for what it's worth, and I know we're waiting for Richard to send up a flare. I don't see anything which says that we can't postpone it. If you want me to clarify, I would make a motion to postpone the amendment on the floor.
Okay.
To a date to that same time.
That works for me. There's a second.
Oh, sorry. And just as a point of order, a motion to postpone has precedence over an amendment. So you can postpone, in my opinion, my
That's
my
the
view.
clarity I was looking for. Thank
they're
you,
listed in order of precedence. Thank you.
Okay. So the motion on the floor is postponed till Wednesday, 7:30. Now. So I would say a roll call vote, but since we don't have Clerk Jones, if we're all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, then I would say this motion, this ordinance, this discussion is postponed till Wednesday at 7:30. Council President, would you like to take back over?
Not really, but I will.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll be quick. Standing committees, alphabetical order as usual. So Budget and Finance is usually first.
Nothing to report.
Education.
We did meet today. I will put notes together and make sure I'll let folks know when those are available.
General Government, nothing to report. Licenses and permits.
Nothing to report.
Neighborhood and City Service.
Nothing to report.
Planning and Development.
We will.
Anything cooking and planning and development?
We will be having a meeting on Thursday night to get 2 appointments confirmed so we can vote on then our meeting on Monday night. One is for the ZBA appointment and one is for a Historic Commission appointment. 6 o'clock Thursday night. That's all.
Okay. Public safety,
Nothing to report.
public utilities,
Nothing.
rules.
Nothing to report.
All right, good of the order. Anyone? Oh, I see hands. Devlin? Councilor Devlin.
I have lost my page. Hold, I didn't do it on purpose. Can anybody hear me?
Okay. Clerk Jones, are you trying to speak? Are you able to speak? No, not able to speak. Councilor Connell.
Nothing at this time.
All right, then I'll go. Yeah, I really think some of this debate went over the line against me, and I object to that. It's really not fair. You know, if you want to disparage someone privately, you can, but humiliating me in a public meeting, especially with members of the public and staff, you know, I really resent that. And I'm going on the record saying that. Just as the insults were recorded, I want to record that. Thank you. Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
I have something.
Councilor Devlin.
So specifically, what insults are you talking about? Look, this is the difficult issue, and when you bring forth a proposal to infringe on does infringe on people's individual rights, you got to expect you're going to get some pushback. So are we supposed to what comments we might have said? Those of us who've been in opposition, we're supposed to infer as to what comments you took offense to. We've all got.
I will provide you with a written list.
We've all got to be a
Councilor Tantar.
Yeah, look, I don't think this conversation is appropriate during good of the order. You know, I appreciate the council president's remarks, but I really don't think we should have a tit for tat, and he's in a bad place. So I just want to say that I really don't think it's appropriate to go back and forth on this here.
All right.
Councilor Lane.
I just wanted to thank everybody for, you know, taking the time. It is important, and I would ask that whatever time you would need to prepare for something or make, you know, an educated decision on this, please do so. And if I can be of any help or you want my personal opinion, feel free to call me.
Okay, motion to adjourn, anyone?
So move. Seconded.
So move.
Any opposed to the motion to adjourn? No, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.